This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never told anyone the full truth about what happened to Clarky. For 50 years, I've carried this inside me, like a stone lodged in my chest that never dissolves. Sometimes I forget it's there, but then I'll see someone who reminds me of him, or smell chlorine, or hear a particular laugh, and it all comes rushing back. Clarky, Christopher Clark, was my best mate throughout primary school. We lived on the same street in our little corner of Manchester, did everything together from age 7 onwards. Two skinny lads with bad haircuts and hand-me-down clothes, always covered in mud or scrapes from whatever adventure we'd gotten ourselves into that day. His mum made the best apple crumble I've ever tasted, and my dad taught us both how to fish in the canal, even though we never caught anything worth keeping. When we started secondary school in 1973, I thought nothing would change. But they put us in different classes, and suddenly everything was different. I only saw him at breaks and after school. The teachers were stricter, the older boys intimidating, and the whole place smelled of floor polish and teenage sweat. We both struggled to fit in, neither of us particularly athletic or clever, just average kids trying to navigate a world that suddenly seemed much bigger and more hostile. That's when Jake and Jonah started noticing us. They were 9th years, 14 going on 15, with that swagger older boys get when they know they're at the top of the food chain. Jake was the taller one, always wearing his uniform shirt, unbuttoned one too many, tie loosened like he didn't give a toss. Jonah was stockier, with this way of staring at you that made your insides go cold. They weren't the only bullies in school, but they were the ones who took a special interest in us. It started small, shoulder checks in the hallway, nicking our lunches, calling us names. Then it escalated to proper shoving, tripping us up, cornering us in the toilets to empty our pockets. Teachers either didn't notice or pretended not to. That was how things worked back then. Boys sorted things out themselves, and complaining just made it worse. The only bright spot was swimming lessons during summer term. By some stroke of luck, they put Clarky and me in the same swimming class on Tuesday afternoons. The pool was this ancient thing, built sometime before the war, all cracked tiles and too much chlorine. But it was our chance to be together, to forget about being separated and picked on. That Tuesday, May 15th, 1974, started like any other. Cloudy, bit of drizzle, typical Manchester weather. We'd had double maths in the morning, which Clarky was hopeless at, and I remember him moaning about fractions as we walked to the sports complex after lunch. The swimming instructor, Mr. Porter, was this ancient bloke with thinning hair and a permanent whistle around his neck. He'd been teaching kids to swim since the flood, as my dad would say. The lesson was nothing special. Laps, treading water, diving for those plastic rings. Clarky was the better swimmer. I was all arms and legs, splashing like I was being electrocuted, while he glided through the water like he belonged there. Afterward, while everyone was getting changed, Clarky nudged me. "Let's hang back," he whispered. "Wait for everyone to leave." This wasn't unusual for us. We'd both developed a strategy of changing after everyone else had gone. Less chance of being noticed, less chance of someone snapping our towels or hiding our clothes. Mr. Porter was in a hurry that day, something about a staff meeting, and he trusted us with the keys to lock up afterward. He knew we were good lads, never caused any trouble. "Don't muck about," he told us, jangling the heavy ring of keys. "Lock up proper when you're done, and push them through the letterbox at the main office. We nodded solemnly, feeling important with this responsibility. After everyone had gone and the changing room fell silent except for the steady drip from the showers, we looked at each other and had the same thought. "One more swim?" Clarky suggested, his eyes bright. It was against the rules, swimming unsupervised, but we were 11, and the temptation of having the whole pool to ourselves was too great. We raced back out, still in our swimming trunks, and jumped in with almighty splashes that echoed around the empty pool hall. The freedom was intoxicating. No instructor blowing his whistle, no other boys to navigate around. Just us, like when we were younger and the world was simpler. We'd been mucking about for maybe 10 minutes when the pool door banged open. My heart sank as Jake and Jonah sauntered in, still in their school uniforms. They must have spotted Mr. Porter leaving and realized we were alone. "Well, well," Jake called, his voice bouncing off the tiled walls. "Look what we've got here, 2 little fishies all alone." I remember the cold that spread through me, not from the water, but from pure fear. Clarky and I instinctively swam to the far end of the pool, putting distance between us and them. "We're just leaving," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Mr. Porter will be back any minute." "Liar," Jonah said, his voice eerily calm. "We saw him heading to the staff room with all the other teachers. No one's coming back." They walked slowly around the perimeter of the pool, like predators stalking prey. I caught Clarky's eye, silently communicating our shared terror. "Swim over here," Jake ordered, pointing to the shallow end where they were now standing. "Now." When we hesitated, Jonah kicked off his shoes and rolled up his trouser legs. "I said now," he bellowed, dipping his foot in the water as if he might come in after us. We swam over slowly, reluctantly. I was trying to think of an escape plan, but my mind was blank with panic. When we reached the shallow end, we stood in chest-deep water, shivering despite the heated pool. That's when I noticed what they were standing next to. Along the edge of the pool was a drainage channel covered by a metal grate, one of those long rectangular ones that ran the width of the shallow end. It was meant to catch overflow water and filter it back into the system. The grate was old, rusted in places, with gaps wide enough to stick your fingers through. Jonah crouched down and hooked his fingers through the grate. With a grunt, he lifted it up, revealing the dark channel underneath, about 8 inches deep and filled with murky water. "I've got a dare for you two," he said, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. "Stick your heads in here." "No way," I said immediately, backing up slightly. The drainage channel looked filthy, and the thought of putting my head in there made my stomach turn. "It wasn't a request," Jake said, stepping closer to the pool's edge. "One of you is doing it, or you're both getting a pasting after school tomorrow." I looked at Clarky, expecting to see the same refusal in his eyes. But instead I saw something that confused me, a sort of resigned determination. Before I could say anything, he moved forward. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "Clarky, don't," I pleaded, grabbing his arm. "It's disgusting and dangerous." He shook me off. "It's fine, it's just water." But his voice trembled, giving away his fear. I'll never understand why he volunteered. Maybe he thought it would be over quicker that way. Maybe he was tired of running and hiding. Or maybe he was protecting me, as he'd done countless times before when I was the target of someone's cruelty. Jonah held the grate up higher, revealing more of the drainage channel. "Get on with it then," he said impatiently. Clarky took a deep breath, then ducked down and awkwardly maneuvered his head into the narrow channel. I watched in horror as his thin shoulders disappeared beneath the surface, his body bent at an uncomfortable angle to fit his head into the space. What happened next plays out in my nightmares in slow motion, though it couldn't have taken more than 30 seconds. Jonah lowered the grate down, not all the way, just enough to trap Clarky in place. I saw Clarky's legs kick suddenly as he realized he was stuck. "That's enough!" I shouted, splashing toward them. "Let him up!" But Jonah pressed his foot down on the grate, holding it firmly in place. Jake was laughing, that horrible braying laugh of his. I could see Clarky's body thrashing now, his arms pushing against the side of the pool, trying to leverage himself free. "He can't breathe!" I screamed, pulling at Jonah's leg. "Stop it!" That's when it happened. In his panic, Clarky twisted violently to the side, trying desperately to free himself. There was a sound, God, that sound, like someone snapping a thick branch, a dull crack that somehow carried through water and air and went straight through me. Clarky's body suddenly went limp. The laughter stopped instantly. Jonah lifted his foot, staring down in confusion. I dove under and pulled at Clarky, dragging him away from the drainage channel and to the surface. His head lolled horribly to one side, eyes open but seeing nothing, lips already turning blue. "Clarky?" I shook him, water streaming from both our faces. "Clarky?" Jake had backed away, his face drained of color. But Jonah was suddenly in the water with us, still in his uniform, splashing frantically to where I held Clarky's unresponsive body. "I didn't mean," he stammered, reaching for Clarky. "I was just messing about. Is he breathing?" He wasn't. I knew it even as I pulled him to the pool's edge. His neck was bent at an impossible angle. Those bright eyes that had laughed with me just minutes before were glazed and fixed. "We need to get help," I gasped, my voice sounding strange and distant in my own ears. Jonah grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging in painfully. His face was transformed by genuine terror. "Listen to me," he hissed. "You can't tell them what really happened. You can't. We were just having a laugh. We didn't mean to hurt him." I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying, while my best friend lay dead or dying beside us. "Please," he begged, and I saw tears in his eyes. "We'll all be in so much trouble. Just say we were all messing around and he got stuck accidentally. Please." Before I could answer, he was splashing toward the exit, yelling that he was going for help. Jake had already disappeared. I stayed with Clarky, holding his cold hand, knowing he was gone but refusing to believe it. Everything after that is a blur of shouting adults, sirens, being wrapped in towels and questioned by police. And I went along with it. God help me. I went along with their story. We were all just playing around. No one meant any harm. It was a terrible accident. I told myself Jonah's remorse was genuine, the way he sobbed at the inquest, how he couldn't look at Clarky's parents. The fact that he left school a month later, and I never saw him again. I convinced myself that telling the truth wouldn't bring Clarky back and would only cause more pain for everyone. But 50 years later, I still see Clarky's face when I close my eyes. I hear that awful crack. I feel the weight of his lifeless body in my arms. And I wonder if I did the right thing. I wonder if I betrayed the best friend I ever had by protecting his killers. I wonder if Jonah and Jake, men in their 60s now, probably with grandchildren of their own, ever think about the boy whose life they cut short on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in 1974. I wonder if they're haunted too. Story 2. I've never been able to talk about this until now. I think enough time has passed, but even typing this is making my hands shake a little. This happened back in 1994 when I was just 10 years old, and it still gives me nightmares sometimes. My family didn't go camping much. We lived in Utah, surrounded by some of the most beautiful mountains and forests in the country, But my dad had a bad back from an old construction accident, so sleeping on the ground wasn't really an option for him. We'd usually rent small cabins if we wanted to spend time outdoors overnight. But this particular summer, Dad was feeling better than he had in years. He'd been doing physical therapy religiously, and when he suggested we do a proper tent camping trip in Farmington Canyon, my mom actually didn't shut it down immediately. I was beyond excited. I'd read so many adventure books and watched movies about camping, but had never experienced a real tent trip myself. My older sister Melissa was 14 and going through that phase where everything our parents suggested was lame. But even she couldn't hide her excitement as we packed up our old Suburban with supplies. It was a Friday afternoon in late July when we headed up to Farmington Canyon. The drive was beautiful, winding roads cutting through forests of aspen and pine, climbing higher and higher until the valley disappeared below us. My dad knew of a spot that wasn't an official campground, but was a clearing well suited for camping, about halfway up the canyon. He'd gone there with friends before I was born. We arrived around 4 in the afternoon. The clearing was perfect, flat ground surrounded by tall pines, with enough space for our large family tent and a fire pit someone had made with stones. There was even a small stream running about 50 yards from our campsite. We brought our 2 dogs with us. Rocky, a golden retriever who was the sweetest boy ever, and Pepper, a black lab mix who was more alert and protective. Setting up camp was an adventure in itself. Dad taught me how to hammer in tent stakes, while Mom and Melissa worked on organizing our supplies. The dogs explored the perimeter, occasionally bringing back sticks for us to throw. It felt magical, like we were finally doing something that normal families in movies did. The evening was perfect. Dad built a fire while Mom prepared hot dogs and s'mores. We sat around telling stories as the sky darkened and filled with more stars than I'd ever seen from our suburban home. The air was cool but not cold, filled with the smell of pine and wood smoke. Even Melissa put her sullen teenager act aside and laughed at Dad's corny jokes. Around 10 o'clock, we decided to turn in. Our tent was pretty big, enough for the 4 of us, plus the 2 dogs. We had sleeping bags laid out on camping pads, and despite the hard ground, I was so excited I didn't think I'd have trouble falling asleep. And I didn't. I drifted off quickly, listening to the soft sounds of the forest and the occasional crackle from the dying embers of our fire outside. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up. It was pitch black in the tent, and at first I wasn't sure what had disturbed me. Then I heard it. Pepper was awake and making a low, rumbling growl. Not his playful growl or even his "someone's at the door" bark. This was different. I'd never heard him make this sound before. I lay completely still, my heart instantly racing. The moonlight filtering through the tent material was just enough for me to see Pepper's silhouette near the tent door. His entire body was rigid, his fur standing up along his spine. Rocky was awake too, but he was silent, which was unusual for him. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the forest floor outside our tent. At first I thought it might be an animal, maybe a deer or even a moose. We'd been told they sometimes wandered through campsites, but these footsteps had a rhythm that was unmistakably human. Someone was walking around our campsite. I wanted to wake my parents, but I was frozen in place by fear. The footsteps continued, moving around the perimeter of our campsite methodically. I could hear them pause at our picnic table where we'd left our cooler and some supplies. There was a soft rustling sound, like someone going through our things. Pepper's growl grew slightly louder, and I heard my dad whisper, "Shh." He was awake. Somehow knowing my dad was alert and aware made me feel both better and worse. Better because I wasn't alone in this terror, but worse because if Dad was concerned enough to stay quiet rather than call out, then this wasn't a normal situation. The footsteps moved toward our car, which was parked about 20 feet from the tent. I heard the distinct sound of someone trying the door handle, then the soft thunk as they found it locked. There was more movement around the car, like they were looking in the windows. Then the footsteps started moving directly toward our tent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as the steps got closer and closer. Pepper's growl became more intense, though still relatively quiet. I felt Mom stir beside me. She was awake now too. No one spoke. No one moved. We all just listened. The footsteps stopped right outside our tent, literally just inches away from where I was lying. I could hear breathing, not heavy or labored, just normal breathing of someone standing still. Whoever it was, they were right there, separated from me by nothing but a thin layer of nylon tent material. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute, they just stood there. Then, slowly, I saw a shadow move across the tent wall as someone ran their hand along the outside of our tent. Pepper let out a sharp, loud bark that made me jump so hard I nearly cried out. There was a sudden movement outside, and then the footsteps quickly retreated. Not running exactly, but moving with purpose away from our tent and back toward the tree line. The moment the footsteps were far enough away, Dad sat up and whispered urgently, "We're leaving. Now. Everyone up. Grab only what you need." Mom didn't even question it. She immediately started rolling up sleeping bags, while Dad pulled on his boots. Melissa and I were too scared to do anything but follow instructions. The dogs were both on high alert now, with Pepper still making occasional low growls toward the direction the footsteps had gone. Dad unzipped the tent just enough to peek out, then whispered, "Car, now." We moved as quickly and quietly as we could, abandoning most of our camping gear. Mom had the car keys and she silently unlocked it as we approached. We piled in, Melissa and me in the back seat with the dogs, Mom in the passenger seat and Dad driving. As he started the engine, I looked out the window back toward our tent. In the moonlight, I couldn't see anyone, but I had the distinct feeling we were being watched from the trees. Dad didn't even wait for the engine to warm up. He threw the car into reverse, then forward, and we started bumping down the rough dirt road that led back to the main canyon road. No one spoke until we were a good mile away from our campsite. "Dad, who was that?" Melissa finally asked, her voice shaking. "Probably those college kids we saw driving up earlier," Dad said, but I could tell from his voice that he didn't believe that. "They were probably just being jerks, trying to scare us." "But they weren't making any noise," I said. "If they were trying to scare us, wouldn't they have made ghost noises or something?" Dad didn't answer that. He was focused on navigating the treacherous canyon road in the pitch darkness. The headlights illuminated just enough of the winding road to keep us from going over the edge, but every curve felt like we might slide off into the darkness. Mom reached over and put her hand on Dad's arm. "It's okay," she said quietly. "We're safe now." But the tension in the car didn't dissipate. Even the dogs remained alert, Pepper keeping his eyes fixed out the back window as if expecting someone to be following us. It was after 1 a.m. when we finally reached the bottom of the canyon and hit paved roads again. Only then did Dad's white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel relax slightly. "We'll come back tomorrow in daylight to get the rest of our stuff," he said. But we never did. Dad and his friend Mike went back the next day to retrieve our tent and the rest of our gear. When they returned, I overheard Dad telling Mom that nothing seemed disturbed at the campsite. Everything was exactly as we'd left it. Nothing stolen, nothing vandalized. That somehow made it worse in my mind. If it had been thieves, at least that would make sense. If it had been pranksters, there would have been some sign of their mischief. But there was nothing, just the memory of those deliberate footsteps and the shadow of a hand against our tent. Dad never took us tent camping again. His back problems flared up, and we went back to cabin rentals when we wanted to spend time in the mountains. We never talked about that night, at least not with me or Melissa. I sometimes wonder if my parents discussed it when we weren't around, trying to make sense of what happened. I'm 39 now, with kids of my own. We go camping sometimes, but always at established campgrounds with plenty of other people around. And I never, ever sleep with my back against the tent wall. To this day, I don't know who was circling our tent that night or what they wanted. Sometimes I try to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a curious hiker who realized too late that they were disturbing a family campsite. Maybe it was someone who was lost and checking if we could help, but didn't want to wake us by calling out. But deep down, I know better. There was something methodical and predatory about those footsteps, like someone who was taking their time, assessing the situation. And whoever it was, they were comfortable in the pitch-black forest in a way that normal hikers aren't. I've read about other strange encounters people have had in national forests and remote areas. Some blame unidentified creatures, others point to feral humans, living off the grid. I don't know what to believe, but I know what I experienced. Every so often I'll be walking in the woods or even just in my backyard at night, and I'll hear footsteps on leaves or pine needles. My heart immediately starts racing, and I'm 10 years old again, lying in that tent in Farmington Canyon, listening to someone or something circling our campsite. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. In the dreams, the tent door slowly unzips from the outside. Story 3. I've kept this story to myself for almost 7 years now. I don't know why I'm finally writing it out, except that I still think about it way too often, and maybe getting it off my chest will help. I'm not looking for explanations. I know how it sounds, but I swear every word of this is exactly how I remember it happening. This was back in 2016, early fall. Me, Simon, and Eddie had been friends since high school, and we tried to go camping once or twice a year to escape Brooklyn for a bit. We weren't exactly outdoorsmen, just city guys who liked the occasional weekend away from traffic and noise. We picked Harriman State Park because it was close enough, about an hour's drive north of the city. Eddie borrowed his brother's Honda CR-V, and we loaded it up with our cheap tents, a cooler full of beer, and enough snacks to survive the apocalypse. The weather forecast was perfect. Low 70s during the day, 50s at night. Ideal camping weather. The first day was completely normal. We arrived around noon on Saturday, found our campsite, set up our tents, and went for a short hike on one of the marked trails. That night, we drank beer around the fire, told the same old stories we always told, and turned in around midnight. Sunday was when everything went wrong. After breakfast, Simon suggested we go off trail for our hike. "I'm sick of following the same paths as every other tourist," he said. "Let's actually explore." Eddie was immediately on board. I was hesitant. I'd read enough about people getting lost in the woods, but I didn't want to be the buzzkill of the group. So we packed day packs with water, some granola bars, and our phones, though reception was spotty at best, and headed out. Simon had a cheap compass and swore he knew how to use it. For about 2 hours, everything was fine. We climbed some steep hills, found a cool rock formation, and took a bunch of photos. The forest was beautiful, with leaves just starting to turn orange and red. Then around 1 in the afternoon, we came across a small lake I'm positive wasn't on any of the park maps. It was maybe a quarter-mile across, almost perfectly circular, with unusually still water. No ripples, even with the light breeze. The trees around it seemed darker and denser than the ones we'd been walking through. "Check that out," Eddie said, pointing toward the far shore. There was a wooden structure partially hidden by trees near the water's edge. We couldn't see it clearly from our position, but it looked like some kind of cabin or shack. "Let's check it out," Simon said, already walking along the shoreline. I remember feeling a weird reluctance to go near that shack, but I followed anyway. As we got closer, I could see it wasn't a cabin, but more like a large shed, maybe 15 by 15 feet with a slanted roof. The wood was gray with age, and there were no windows, just a single door hanging slightly ajar. The area around it was oddly clear of vegetation, like nothing would grow near it. "This is cool," Eddie said, though his voice didn't sound convinced. "Must be for park maintenance or something." Simon reached the door first and pushed it open. The hinges made this high-pitched squeal that made my skin crawl. "Guys, come look at this," he called. Inside it was dim and smelled like damp earth and something else I couldn't identify, something metallic and stale. There was a large table in the center of the room, heavy wood with dark stains all over it. Along the walls were rows of metal hooks, some rusty, some not. There was nothing else, no chairs, no storage, nothing on the walls. "It's a hunting shack," Eddie said, though he sounded uncertain. "For dressing game. That's why there are hooks and the table is stained." But something felt off. For one thing, I'm pretty sure hunting isn't allowed in Harriman, and the hooks seemed weirdly positioned, not practical for hanging deer or whatever. They were arranged in neat rows at about head height all around the room. "This place gives me the creeps," I said. "Let's go." We were about to leave when Simon tripped over something just outside the door. "Shit," he yelped, stumbling forward. "There's something metal sticking out of the ground here." Eddie and I walked over. About 2 inches of rusted iron was protruding from the dirt. Simon started digging around it with a stick, and Eddie joined in, scraping away with his boot. I stood back, already feeling like we should just leave it alone. After a few minutes of digging, they had exposed what looked like the top of a helmet buried in the ground. But not like any helmet I'd ever seen. It was shaped like a pyramid or triangle, with a flat base where it would sit on someone's head. Near the front were 2 cross-shaped slits, presumably for seeing through. "Holy shit," Eddie whispered. "That's weird as hell." Simon worked it free from the dirt. It was heavy, maybe 10 or 12 pounds, and covered in rust and dirt, but you could still make out the bizarre shape. The cross-shaped eye slits were the most disturbing part. They weren't simple crosses. Each had these small protrusions at the tips, almost like thorns. "This can't be from the Revolutionary War or Civil War," Eddie said, turning it over. "It doesn't look like any military helmet I've ever seen." "Maybe it's for some weird religious thing," Simon suggested, "or a movie prop someone left out here." He tried to put it on his head, but I grabbed his arm. "Are you crazy? Don't put that thing on your head." I was surprised by the force in my voice. Simon laughed. "What, you think it's cursed or something?" But he set it back down. I can't explain why, but being near that helmet made me deeply uncomfortable. It felt wrong, like something that shouldn't exist. The weight of it seemed excessive for a helmet, and those eye slits, who could possibly see properly through those narrow openings? Eddie wanted to take it with us, but I insisted we leave it. We argued briefly, and eventually I convinced them to just take pictures instead. Simon snapped a few on his phone, then dropped the helmet back into its hole. But as we were about to cover it up, he changed his mind. "Actually, I want to bring it back to camp. We can clean it up and get a better look." I protested again, but was outvoted. Simon stuffed the helmet into his backpack, and we started making our way back toward camp, using the compass to navigate. The mood had changed. We were quiet, no longer joking around like before. We got back to our campsite around 4:30. The sun was still up, but the forest was getting darker. Simon took the helmet out and started cleaning it with water from his canteen and a t-shirt. The more dirt he removed, the more unsettling it looked. The metal wasn't just rusty. It had these strange, faint markings that might have been symbols or writing. While Simon was occupied with the helmet, Eddie and I started preparing dinner, just hot dogs and beans we could cook over the fire. None of us talked much. I kept glancing at Simon, who seemed increasingly absorbed in examining the helmet. He would turn it over and over, running his fingers along the inside, peering into those cross-shaped slits. At one point I walked over and asked, "Find anything interesting?" He didn't answer for a moment, then said without looking up, "It feels old, really old, but it's not like anything I've ever seen in a museum." His voice sounded different, flatter, more distant. We ate as the sun went down. Simon barely touched his food. He kept the helmet close, occasionally picking it up and looking into those slits. After dinner, we sat around the fire, but the usual banter was missing. Eventually, Eddie tried to lighten the mood by suggesting we tell ghost stories, which felt like a terrible idea given the circumstances. Around 9:30, in the middle of Eddie's story about some urban legend, Simon suddenly stood up. Without a word, he grabbed the helmet and walked away from the campfire into the darkness of the woods. "Where are you going?" I called after him. "Just need to take a leak," he said, his voice fading as he moved away. Eddie and I exchanged looks but continued talking. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. "Should we go look for him?" Eddie asked, clearly concerned. We were just about to grab our flashlights when Simon emerged from the darkness. Even in the firelight, I could see something was wrong. His face was pale, almost gray. He was empty-handed. "Where's the helmet?" Eddie asked. Simon sat down hard on his camp chair. "I threw it away, into the woods." "Why would you do that?" Eddie seemed genuinely upset. "We could have sold it or something." Simon shook his head. I didn't want it looking at me anymore. The way he said it, so matter-of-factly, made my blood run cold. "What do you mean, looking at you?" I asked. Simon just stared into the fire. "I don't want to talk about it. I shouldn't have picked it up in the first place." We tried to get more out of him, but he wouldn't elaborate. After about half an hour of uncomfortable silence, Simon announced he was going to bed. Eddie and I stayed up a bit longer, talking quietly about what might have happened, before turning in ourselves. I couldn't sleep. My tent was next to Simon's, and I could hear him tossing and turning all night. Occasionally, he would mumble something I couldn't make out. Around 3 in the morning, I heard him sit up suddenly and gasp, like he'd woken from a nightmare. By first light, I was exhausted but relieved to see the sun coming up. When I got out of my tent, Simon was already up, packing his things. "We need to leave," he said without looking at me. "Now." Eddie emerged from his tent, groggy and confused. "What's going on?" "Simon wants to head out early," I explained. "Damn right I do," Simon muttered. "I'm not spending another minute in these woods." We packed up quickly, not even bothering with breakfast beyond a few granola bars. No one mentioned the helmet or the shack. It was like an unspoken agreement that we wouldn't talk about it. The drive back to Brooklyn was almost completely silent. Simon stared out the window the entire time, occasionally closing his eyes and pressing his forehead against the glass. Eddie tried once to bring up what happened, asking Simon directly what had spooked him, but Simon just said, "Drop it, man, seriously." And that was it. We went back to our lives. But things weren't the same between us. Simon became increasingly withdrawn over the next few months. He stopped joining our regular hangouts, then eventually moved to Chicago for a job without much of a goodbye. Eddie and I drifted apart too. We never discussed that weekend again. About a year after our trip, curiosity got the better of me, and I spent hours researching online, trying to find information about that lake or shack. I couldn't find them on any official park maps. I searched for references to pyramid-shaped helmets or masks with cross-shaped eye slits, but found nothing conclusive, just vague references to obscure religious artifacts from various cultures. I even considered going back to Harriman to look for the lake again, but something always held me back. Deep down, I'm afraid of what I might find or not find. To this day, I don't know what Simon experienced in the woods that night, or why he said the helmet was looking at him. Sometimes I wonder if he put it on when he wandered off alone, despite my warning. I wonder what he saw through those cross-shaped slits. I still have the photos of the helmet on my phone. Sometimes I look at them, trying to make sense of the markings, the strange shape. And sometimes, when I stare at those cross-shaped eye slits for too long, I swear they seem to stare back. Story 4. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened back in February of 2009. I was 17, a junior at Lakeside High, and the starting point guard on our basketball team. We were having an incredible season, 19 wins and only 3 losses, and were just days away from our sectional championship game against our rivals, Jefferson High. Our coach, Coach Miller, was intense but fair. He wanted us at our absolute best for the championship, so he arranged a scrimmage against some all-star team from a neighboring district. These guys were supposedly the real deal, taller, faster, and more athletic than us. Coach said it would toughen us up before the big game. The scrimmage was set at this old community center about 30 minutes from our school. It wasn't ideal, but it was neutral ground and the only place available on short notice. When we arrived that afternoon, I immediately got a weird feeling about the place. The gym itself was decent enough. Standard hardwood court, bleachers, nothing special. But Coach Miller told us we'd be using the basement as our locker room since the visitors had claimed the main one. From the moment we walked down those concrete stairs, I felt uneasy. The basement was huge, with exposed pipes running across the ceiling and flickering fluorescent lights that barely illuminated the space. It was freezing down there too, probably 50 degrees at most, and smelled like mildew and something else I couldn't quite place. There were some old wooden benches scattered around and a couple of rusty lockers against the far wall, but most of the space disappeared into darkness beyond where the lights reached. "This is bullshit," muttered my teammate Derek as we changed into our uniforms. "Why do those guys get the real locker room while we freeze our asses off down here?" "Because we're the home team, technically," replied Chris, my best friend since elementary school and our shooting guard. "Home team always gets the worst of it in these scenarios." I was unusually quiet, still trying to shake off the weird feeling I had. Something about the basement just felt wrong. "You okay, Tyler?" Chris asked, nudging my shoulder. Yeah, just, doesn't this place creep you out a little? The guys laughed, and Marcus, our center, threw a rolled-up sock at me. Matthews is scared of the dark. Shut up, I said, forcing a smile. It's just cold as hell down here. Coach Miller came down the stairs then, clipboard in hand. All right, ladies, gather round, he called out. We huddled around him as he went over the game plan, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing toward the darkened back section of the basement where the light didn't reach. I could have sworn I heard something moving back there. When we headed upstairs for warm-ups, I was relieved to be out of the basement. The scrimmage itself was brutal. These guys were every bit as good as Coach said they'd be. I got knocked around pretty good trying to defend their point guard, who had at least 4 inches and 30 pounds on me. By halftime, we were down by 15 points. They're killing us on the boards, Coach said during our halftime talk back in that creepy basement. Matthews, you need to be more aggressive on defense, and for God's sake, can someone box out their center? I nodded, but truthfully, I was distracted. That feeling of being watched was even stronger now, and the darkness at the back of the room seemed to have grown somehow. The halftime break couldn't end fast enough. The second half went marginally better, but we still lost by 12 points. Coach wasn't happy, but he acknowledged that the other team was exceptional. This is exactly what we needed, he told us afterward. Now we know what we're up against. Jefferson plays a similar style. Most of the guys were quick to shower and change. Nobody wanted to spend more time in that basement than necessary, even if they wouldn't admit what I was feeling. The water in the showers was barely lukewarm, and the pressure sucked, which only added to everyone's frustration. By 5:30, almost everyone had cleared out. Coach Miller said he needed to discuss some strategy with the assistant coach and told us to make sure we locked up when we left. Only Chris and I remained in the basement as I was taking my time getting dressed after my shower. Hurry up, man, Chris said, checking his phone. My mom's making lasagna tonight and I'm starving. Almost done, I replied, tying my shoes. Just give me a minute. That's when we heard it. A loud crash from the back of the room, like something metal falling over. Chris and I both froze. What was that? I whispered. Chris shrugged, but I could tell he was spooked too. Probably just the pipes or something. That wasn't pipes, I said, standing up slowly. That sounded like someone knocked something over. Well, everyone's gone except us, Chris replied, but his voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my cell phone and turned on the flashlight function. It wasn't very bright. This was 2009, remember, but it was better than nothing. What are you doing? Chris hissed. I'm gonna check it out, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Are you insane? Let's just go. But curiosity got the better of me. Just come with me. It'll take 2 seconds. Reluctantly, Chris followed as I made my way toward the back of the basement. The weak light from my phone created long, shifting shadows as we moved past the shower area. The further back we went, the colder it got, and that strange smell grew stronger. I don't like this, Tyler, Chris muttered behind me. Me neither, I admitted. But I just want to make sure. My voice trailed off as my light fell on something that made my blood run cold. There was a small storage area in the very back corner, partially concealed by some old equipment, and huddled in that corner was a man. He was probably in his 30s, but it was hard to tell. His face was gaunt and dirty, his clothes tattered and stained. His hair was matted and greasy, hanging down over wild eyes that reflected my phone's light like an animal's. When our eyes met, I felt a jolt of pure terror run through me. Holy shit, Chris gasped. The man's expression changed instantly from surprise to rage. His lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing yellow teeth. "Who the fuck are you?" I managed to say, my voice cracking. The man didn't respond with words. Instead, he let out a sound I'll never forget, a high-pitched, inhuman scream that echoed off the basement walls. Then he lunged. I don't think I've ever moved so fast in my life. I dropped my phone, plunging everything into darkness, and scrambled backward. Chris was already running, and I followed the sound of his footsteps. Behind us, I could hear the man's ragged breathing and the slap of bare feet on concrete. "Go, go, go!" I yelled, pushing Chris toward the stairs. We sprinted across the basement, knocking over benches in our panic. I was just a few feet from the stairs when I felt fingers close around my ankle. I went down hard, smashing my chin against the floor. The pain was immediate and intense, but the adrenaline overpowered it. I kicked wildly, connecting with something solid. There was a grunt of pain, and the grip loosened just enough for me to scramble away. Chris had reached the stairs and was halfway up when he realized I wasn't behind him. He turned back. "Tyler!" I managed to get to my feet and lunge for the stairs. The man was right, behind me. I could feel his breath on my neck. Chris reached down and grabbed my arm, pulling me up the steps two at a time. We burst through the door at the top of the stairs into the gym, slamming it shut behind us. There was no lock, so we both leaned against it, gasping for breath. "What the fuck was that?" Chris panted. Before I could answer, something slammed into the door from the other side with enough force to make us both jump. Then again, and again, the door shuddered with each impact. "We need to get out of here," I said. We abandoned the door and ran across the gym toward the exit. Behind us, I heard the basement door crash open. I didn't look back. We made it outside to the parking lot where, thankfully, Coach Miller and Assistant Coach Reeves were still standing by Coach's car, deep in conversation. "Coach!" I shouted. They both turned, alarmed by the panic in my voice. "Matthews, what's going on?" Coach Miller demanded as we skidded to a stop in front of them. "There's someone in the basement," Chris blurted out. "A man. He attacked us." "What are you talking about?" Coach looked confused. Between gasps for air, we explained what had happened. Coach Miller's expression hardened as he listened. "Stay here," he said firmly. "Both of you. Call 911. He turned to Coach Reeves. "Dave, you're with me." "Coach, don't," I pleaded. "This guy is seriously messed up." But Coach Miller was already heading back toward the community center, Coach Reeves right behind him. They disappeared inside while Chris fumbled with his phone to call the police. Those next few minutes were the longest of my life. We stood in the darkening parking lot, jumping at every shadow, waiting for the police and praying our coaches would be okay. Finally, we heard sirens in the distance. At almost the same moment, the community center door burst open. Coach Reeves emerged, half dragging Coach Miller, whose left arm was covered in blood. "He's still in there!" Coach Reeves shouted as they staggered toward us. "Lock yourselves in my car." We did as we were told, diving into Coach Reeves' Honda and locking the doors. Through the windows, I could see Coach Miller's sleeve was slashed open, blood seeping through the fabric where Coach Reeves was applying pressure. The police arrived moments later, 3 patrol cars with flashing lights. Officers poured out, some rushing to Coach Miller, while others drew their weapons and entered the building. It took them almost an hour to find the man. He had retreated to his corner in the basement and was apparently so high on something that it took 4 officers to restrain him. When they finally brought him out in handcuffs, I got a better look at him under the parking lot lights. His eyes were vacant, drool hanging from his lip, muttering incomprehensibly. He didn't even seem human anymore. Coach Miller needed 27 stitches in his arm. The man had slashed him with a box cutter when the coaches confronted him in the basement. If Coach Reeves hadn't tackled the guy, it could have been much worse. The police told us the man had probably been living in that basement for weeks. They found a makeshift bed, empty food containers, and drug paraphernalia in his little corner. The community center was only used a few days a week, so he'd found the perfect hiding spot. Our sectional championship game was postponed for a week. We ended up losing to Jefferson by 5 points, but honestly, basketball seemed a lot less important after what happened. I ran into Coach Miller at a gas station last summer. I was home from college visiting my parents. We got to talking about old times, and eventually I asked about that night. "Did they ever find out who that guy was?" I asked. Coach Miller shook his head. "No identification on him. Just another lost soul whose mind got eaten by drugs." He absently rubbed the scar on his arm. "The police said he probably wouldn't have hurt you boys intentionally. People in that state are more scared than dangerous most of the time. But I remember those eyes in the darkness, that inhuman scream, and those fingers grabbing my ankle. Whatever humanity had once existed in that man was long gone by the time we found him. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, feeling those fingers on my ankle, hearing that scream echo in my ears, and I can never bring myself to go into basements anymore." Story 5. I still remember how excited we were about that stupid camping trip. It was summer of '79, and Cambridge was sticky with heat that clung to everything. Mark, Joey, and I were working dead-end jobs that summer. Me at a hardware store, Mark doing deliveries, and Joey waiting tables. We were all frustrated, bored, and desperate for something different. It was Mark who suggested camping at Harold Parker State Forest. Just a weekend away from everything. 3 nights in the woods to reset. None of us were exactly outdoorsmen, but we had enough gear between us to make it work. I had my old blue Dodge Omni hatchback that barely ran. Mark had this ancient 2-man tent with duct tape patches covering holes from God knows what. Joey had a 1-person tent that was basically a glorified garbage bag. We pooled what little money we had for supplies, cheap beer, hot dogs, beans, and marshmallows. Looking back, we were so damn naive. We left that Friday afternoon after work. The drive took about an hour, with the car radio blasting Journey and Boston while we talked about all the crap we wanted to leave behind. Shitty bosses, bills, relationship problems. It felt so good just to be getting away. When we arrived at Harold Parker, we picked a spot near Berry Pond, this small clearing with tall pines and oaks surrounding it. You could see glimpses of the water through the trees. It felt perfect. The first couple days were exactly what we needed. We hiked some of the trails during the day, swam in the pond, drank beer around the campfire at night, and just laughed like we hadn't in months. Saturday night, we stayed up late telling stupid ghost stories like we were kids again. Joey told this ridiculous one about a headless hiker that supposedly haunted the woods, and we all cracked up at how hard he was trying to make it scary. We crashed in our tents around 1 in the morning, Mark and I sharing his patched-up tent, Joey in his tiny one. Sunday was more of the same. We fished a bit in the morning, caught nothing, then hiked to this rocky outcrop that looked over part of the forest. We were sunburned, mosquito-bitten, and happier than we'd been in ages. That night, we grilled the last of our hot dogs and finished off most of our beer. None of us wanted to think about going back to real life the next day. Mark seemed especially quiet that evening, but we figured he was just tired or dreading Monday like the rest of us. We turned in around midnight. I remember falling asleep almost instantly, the combination of sun, beer, and fresh air knocking me out completely. Then something woke me up. When I checked my watch, the dim glow showed it was around 4:30 in the morning. The woods were completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just this heavy, pressing silence that felt wrong. I realized two things at once. The tent was unzipped, and Mark wasn't in his sleeping bag. His jacket was still there, crumpled up as a makeshift pillow, but he was gone. I figured he'd gotten up to take a leak, so I waited a few minutes, listening for him coming back through the brush. Nothing. After maybe 10 minutes, I started to worry. It was cold, too cold for him to be out without his jacket. I grabbed my flashlight and poked my head outside. "Mark," I called out, not too loud at first. No answer. The campfire was down to embers, casting this eerie red glow over our little clearing. I called his name again, louder this time. Still nothing. I pulled on my shoes and started walking around the immediate area, shining my light between the trees. I checked the path to the pond, thinking maybe he'd gone for water or something. Nothing. I checked the trail leading to the main road. Nothing. My heart started beating faster, and this sick feeling settled in my stomach. I went to Joey's tent and shook it. "Joey, wake up, Mark's gone." He grumbled something, then his head poked out. "What do you mean, gone?" He squinted up at me, hair sticking up in all directions. "I mean, he's not in the tent, and he's been gone a while. His jacket's still there." Joey must have heard the worry in my voice, because he crawled out immediately and pulled on his boots. Together, we did another sweep of the campsite, calling Mark's name. Our voices sounded wrong in the silent forest, like they were being swallowed up by the darkness between the trees. We checked the restroom facilities about 100 yards away. Empty. The parking area, empty. "Maybe he went for a walk?" Joey suggested, but his voice was thin with disbelief. Who goes for a walk in the pitch-black woods at 4 in the morning without a jacket or flashlight? We decided to check the trails. It was still mostly dark, but the sky was starting to lighten just a bit in the east. We each had our flashlights, and we headed down the main trail that led deeper into the forest, away from the pond. We'd hiked this trail the day before, so I thought maybe Mark had gone that way because it was familiar. We'd been walking for maybe 5 minutes, calling Mark's name every few yards, when Joey's light caught something on the ground just off the trail. "Is that?" Joey bent down. It was Mark's red baseball cap, the one he'd been wearing all weekend. It was just lying there in the dirt, like it had been dropped. My throat went dry. "Mark!" I shouted, panic rising in my voice. "Mark, where are you?" We pushed on, moving faster now, scanning our lights frantically across the ground and between the trees. About 20 yards further, we found one of his socks. Then another 10 yards later, his other sock. It was like following a trail of breadcrumbs, except it was my friend's clothing. "What the hell is going on?" Joey whispered, his voice cracking. I couldn't answer. My mind was racing with horrible possibilities, none of them making any sense. Another 50 yards down the trail, we found his jeans, crumpled in a heap right in the middle of the path. I remember thinking, he wouldn't just take off his pants and keep walking. But that's exactly what it looked like had happened. We kept going, the sky gradually getting lighter, casting everything in this gray half-light that made the shadows between the trees look deeper. About 100 yards further, we found his t-shirt hanging from a low branch, like someone had deliberately placed it there. Then, a few yards beyond that, his boxers. my friend's clothing, leaving a trail deeper and deeper into the woods. Joey and I hardly spoke now. We just followed the trail, our flashlights bouncing wildly as our hands shook. The forest felt alive around us, watching, waiting. I kept thinking we should turn back, get help, but I couldn't leave without knowing what had happened to Mark. The trail curved around a large boulder, and as we rounded it, Joey's flashlight beam caught something pale on the ground ahead. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It was flesh-colored and still, lying on the forest floor about 20 feet ahead of us. We approached slowly, neither of us wanting to see what we were both afraid we would find. My flashlight joined Joey's, and the combined light revealed the full horror of what was there. It was Mark. He was completely naked, lying face down on the ground. His body was unmarked, unnaturally pale in the early morning light. But where his head should have been, there was nothing. Just a perfectly straight, clean cut across his neck. No blood, no signs of struggle, nothing. Just my friend's body, headless, looking like some kind of sick display. Joey turned away and vomited. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My brain kept trying to reject what my eyes were seeing. It wasn't possible. The cut was so clean it looked surgical. There were no other marks on his body, no signs that he'd fought or struggled, and no head anywhere to be seen. I don't remember much about the next few minutes. I think I was in shock. Joey was sobbing, and I was just standing there, my flashlight still trained on Mark's body, unable to look away. Eventually, some kind of survival instinct kicked in, and I grabbed Joey's arm. "We need to go," I said. "We need to get help." We practically ran back to the campsite, following the trail of Mark's clothes in reverse. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? When we reached our camp, we didn't pack up, didn't take anything but the car keys. We jumped into my Omni and drove straight to the ranger headquarters in Middleton, about 15 minutes away. The rangers didn't believe us at first. I couldn't blame them. Our story sounded insane. We were wild-eyed, dirty, and speaking in fragmented sentences about finding our friend's headless body in the woods. They probably thought we were on drugs or playing some sick prank. But something in our terror must have convinced them, because they called the police, who arrived about 20 minutes later. We led them back to the spot, following the same trail of clothing. When we reached the boulder and rounded it, I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare loop, reliving the horror all over again. But the police reaction confirmed this was all too real. They immediately secured the area and radioed for backup. Soon the quiet forest was crawling with officers, crime scene technicians, and search teams looking for Mark's missing head. They never found it. Not that day, not ever. The next few hours were a blur. They separated Joey and me, questioning us at the police station for hours. They treated us like suspects, which I guess made sense from their perspective. 3 friends go camping, 1 ends up decapitated. Who else would they look at? They took all our gear as evidence, photographed us, took our fingerprints, the works. It took weeks for forensics to clear us. Mark's body had no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle. The cut was determined to be too clean, too precise for any weapon we had with us. The medical examiner said it would have required medical knowledge and specialized equipment. There was almost no blood at the scene, suggesting he'd been killed elsewhere and placed there. But why? And by whom? The case went cold. Without suspects or a clear motive, the investigation stalled. Mark's parents were devastated. They looked at Joey and me with suspicion that never fully went away, even after we were cleared. I couldn't blame them. They needed someone to blame, and the alternative was accepting that some unknown monster had taken their son for no reason. That camping trip destroyed my life. I spiraled into severe alcoholism, lost my job, my girlfriend left me, and most of my friends drifted away. I couldn't sleep without seeing Mark's headless body in my dreams. I spent years in therapy trying to process what had happened. I developed a phobia of forests so severe I can't even drive past wooded areas without having panic attacks. Joey didn't fare much better. Last I heard, he'd moved across the country, changed his name, and cut ties with everyone who knew him before. I don't blame him for wanting to escape the memories and the whispers. There were always people who thought we had something to do with it, no matter what the police concluded. It's been over 40 years now, and I still wake up in a cold sweat sometimes, hearing nothing but that unnatural silence in the woods. I've never gone camping again, never set foot in another forest. The worst part isn't the nightmares or the fear, it's the not knowing. What happened to Mark that night? Why did he leave the tent? Did he go willingly with someone, or was he taken? And why the hell was his head removed so cleanly, like some kind of trophy? The rangers closed that section of Harold Parker State Forest for months after it happened, but eventually reopened it. People camp there every summer, completely unaware that something walked those woods one night in '79 and took my friend, something that's never been caught or explained. I still have the newspaper clippings about the headless camper case in a box under my bed. The headlines faded years ago, but the questions they asked never have. Sometimes I take them out and read them, hoping that somehow I'll notice something I missed before, some clue that would explain what happened. But there's nothing, just the memories and the fear that whatever was in those woods that night is still out there somewhere, waiting. Story 6. I still get chills when I think about last Black Friday. What was supposed to be a fun day of shopping turned into something that still makes me sleep with my bedroom door locked and a chair propped under my doorknob. Let me start from the beginning. I'm Emma, I'm 20 years old, and live in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Ridgemont. Nothing interesting ever happens here. It's mostly just families and older people. That's why what happened was so terrifying, because it happened in a place where I've always felt safe. I woke up early that morning around 6. I was excited because my friend Jessica and I had this whole day planned. We'd been doing Black Friday together since high school, and it's kind of our tradition. I showered, threw on some comfy clothes, for a long day of shopping, grabbed my purse and headed over to Jessica's house. I got to Jessica's around 7 in the morning. We had coffee and some toast her mom made for us before heading out. Our plan was to hit the big box stores first, then the mall, and finish at some of the boutiques downtown. Normal stuff, nothing crazy. The first part of the day was completely fine. We went to Target, Best Buy, and a couple other places. It was crowded, sure, but that's Black Friday for you. We scored some good deals, had lunch at the food court in the mall, and were having a pretty good time. It wasn't until later, maybe around 4 in the afternoon, when things got weird. We went to this clothing store that was having a massive sale, like 60% off everything. The place was packed. You could barely move around, and the line to check out wrapped around half the store. We grabbed a bunch of stuff and got in line. That's when I first noticed him. There was this man standing behind us in the checkout line. He wasn't holding anything. No clothes, no bags, nothing. He was just standing there. He wore these dark sunglasses even though we were inside. a black winter hat pulled down low, and this long black coat that went almost to his knees. I remember thinking it was weird that he didn't have anything to buy, especially since we had to wait in that line for literally 30 minutes. I whispered to Jessica about it, and she glanced back, then shrugged it off. "Probably waiting for his girlfriend or something," she said. That made sense, so I tried to forget about it. But something about him kept bothering me. He never moved, never checked his phone, never looked around impatiently like everyone else in the line. He just stared straight ahead, completely still. I kept getting this uncomfortable feeling on the back of my neck, like when you know someone's watching you. When we finally got to the register and paid, I was relieved to get out of there. We went to one more store after that, but I was getting tired and suggested we call it a day. Jessica agreed, so we headed back to her house. I stayed at Jessica's for a bit, sorting through our purchases and helping her mom prepare some leftover Thanksgiving food. Around 7, I decided to head home. Jessica offered to let me stay for dinner, but I was exhausted and just wanted to get home, take a hot shower, and relax. The drive home was normal, nothing unusual. I didn't notice anyone following me or anything like that. I pulled into my driveway, grabbed my shopping bags, and went inside. My parents were out of town visiting my grandparents for the weekend, so I had the house to myself. I took a shower, put on my pajamas, and settled on the couch to watch Netflix. I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sound of knocking at my front door. I checked my phone. It was just after 10 at night. At first, I thought maybe it was Jessica. Sometimes she drops by if she forgets to tell me something or wants to show me something she bought. But then I realized she would have texted first. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. I muted the TV and sat there, suddenly very aware that I was alone in the house. Who would be knocking on my door at 10 p.m.? I didn't order any food, and my neighbors never come by this late. I crept to the front window and carefully pulled back the curtain just enough to peek out at the porch. What I saw made my blood freeze in my veins. It was him, the man from the store. Same black coat, same black winter hat, same dark sunglasses, even though it was nighttime. He was just standing there facing my door, completely still. I jumped back from the window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. How did he know where I lived? How did he find me? What did he want? The knocking came again, slower this time, deliberate. 3 distinct knocks, then silence. I stood there, paralyzed, not even daring to breathe. Should I call the police? What would I even say? There's a guy at my door? He wasn't doing anything technically illegal. But how did he find my address? I decided to just stay quiet. Maybe he'd think no one was home and leave. I turned off all the lights except for the dim one in the kitchen and tiptoed to the back of the house as far from the front door as possible. The knocking stopped, but when I peeked through the blinds in my bedroom, I could see he was still there, just standing, waiting, like a statue. For 5 whole minutes, I timed it on my phone. He didn't move a muscle, just stood there, facing my door. Then, without any warning, he turned and walked away. Not quickly, not slowly, just a normal, casual pace, like someone leaving after a friendly visit. I heard a car engine start up a minute later, and then the sound of tires on pavement as a vehicle drove past my house. I was shaking so badly I had to sit down on my bed. How had he found me? I kept thinking about the entire day, trying to figure out if I'd seen him anywhere else. Had he followed me from store to store? Had he been watching me at Jessica's house? Had he followed me home? The thought made me sick to my stomach. I called Jessica immediately, my voice trembling as I told her what happened. She wanted to come over, but I was afraid he might come back and see her car. I called my next-door neighbor instead, an older man who used to be a police officer. He came over right away and checked around my house but found nothing. I spent the night with every light in the house on, jumping at every sound. I kept checking the windows, expecting to see him standing in my yard, watching me. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I called my parents and told them what happened. They came home early, and my dad installed security cameras that same day. We filed a police report, but without any evidence of a threat or crime, there wasn't much they could do. They told me to call immediately if I saw him again. It's been 3 months now, and I haven't seen him since, but I still can't shake the feeling of being watched. I changed my routes to work and school. I never go shopping alone anymore. I check my rearview mirror constantly when I'm driving. The worst part is not knowing who he was, not knowing what he wanted, not knowing how he found my address. The police suggested maybe he lived nearby and had seen me around, or maybe it was just a coincidence, some weirdo who knocked on a random door. But I know better. The way he stood there, waiting. He knew exactly whose door he was knocking on. Sometimes I still think I see him, a tall figure in a black coat disappearing around a corner or standing motionless among a crowd. But when I look again, he's gone. Maybe my mind is playing tricks on me. Maybe he's moved on to terrify someone else, or maybe he's still watching, waiting for the right moment to knock on my door again. Every night when I lock my doors and windows, I wonder if it will be enough. I wonder if I'll hear those 3 deliberate knocks again. And I wonder what will happen if one day he decides to do more than just knock. Story 7. I still can't sleep right when I think about what happened at Red Shirt Table. It's been almost 3 years now, but the memories are still so fresh they could have happened yesterday. I've never shared this with anyone outside our reservation, but I need to get this off my chest. My name is Liam, and I grew up on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. That's where I met Terry back in high school. We were tight from day one. Both of us liked the same music, played basketball, and shared that weird sense of humor where you laugh at things nobody else finds funny. After graduation, we both stuck around, me working at my uncle's auto shop, Terry doing odd jobs while trying to reconnect with his traditional spiritual roots. Terry had been going through some stuff and was really diving deep into our traditions. He'd been learning from his grandfather, participating in sweat lodges, and getting more involved in ceremonies. I respected it, but didn't share the same level of connection to those practices. My grandparents were forced into those boarding schools, so a lot of our family traditions got lost over the years. One Friday in late October, Terry called me up. "Hey man, I need to do this prayer thing out at Red Shirt Table. Can you come with me? I don't want to go alone." Red Shirt Table is this sacred area with these massive rock formations that overlook the Badlands. It's about an hour's drive from where we lived. Beautiful place during the day, but everyone from the res knows you don't go there after dark. There are stories about that place that would make your skin crawl. Today, it's already like 3 in the afternoon, I told him, checking my watch. We'd be out there when it gets dark. I know, but I need to do this now. It's important, Terry insisted. We'll be back before it gets too late. Sarah's coming too. Sarah was his girlfriend of about 6 months. I should have said no. Every instinct told me to say no. But Terry had been there for me through some rough patches, so I agreed. Fine, but we're not staying out there long. He picked me up around 4:30 in his old Chevy truck. Sarah was in the passenger seat. and her friend Melissa was in the back. I squeezed in next to Melissa, whom I'd only met once before. Terry seemed tense, fidgeting with the radio and barely talking. Sarah kept looking at him with this worried expression. "So, what exactly are we doing out there?" I asked as we drove through the reservation. "Just need to make an offering and say some prayers," Terry said, eyes fixed on the road. "It won't take long." The sun was already starting to sink as we drove out to Red Shirt Table. The landscape is something else, rolling prairies that suddenly drop off into these eroded canyons of red and tan striped rock. It's like looking at the skeleton of the earth. Beautiful, but there's something ancient and unsettling about it too. We arrived about 45 minutes before sundown. The place was deserted, which wasn't unusual. Most locals don't hang around there in the evening. Terry parked near one of the lookout points, and we all got out of the truck. The wind was picking up, making that low whistling sound as it swept across the plains. "I need to go down there," Terry said, pointing toward a spot where you could descend into the formations. He had a small bundle wrapped in red cloth. "You guys wait here, I won't be long." Sarah grabbed his arm. "I don't like this, Terry. It's getting dark." "It's fine," he said, shrugging her off. "I need to do this." I watched as Terry made his way down the path that led to a lower area. The sun was setting fast, painting everything in deep orange and purple. Despite the beauty, I felt uneasy. Something just felt off about the whole situation. "He's been acting weird all week," Sarah said, hugging herself against the chill. "He won't tell me what's going on." "Did something happen?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know. He went to visit his grandfather last weekend, and he's been different since then. Quiet, having nightmares." As the light faded, the temperature dropped quickly. We decided to wait in the truck. I kept my eyes on the spot where Terry had disappeared, occasionally checking my phone for the time. 30 minutes passed, then 45. "Should we go look for him?" Melissa asked, breaking the tense silence in the truck. I was about to answer when Sarah pointed out the window. "What are those lights?" At first, I thought she was talking about stars, but when I looked where she was pointing, I saw what looked like headlights in the distance, out on the prairie. Except they weren't on any road, just floating out there in the darkness. "Probably just some rancher's truck," I said, not believing it myself. Terry had left a pair of binoculars in the truck. I grabbed them and focused on the lights. What I saw made my blood run cold. They weren't headlights at all. They were balls of light, about the size of basketballs, blinking on and off across the prairie. And they were moving, not like vehicles following a path, but erratically, like fireflies. Some would disappear and then reappear in a completely different spot. "What is it?" Sarah asked, noticing my expression. I handed her the binoculars. "I don't know what those are." She looked and immediately dropped the binoculars in her lap. "We need to find Terry now." As she said that, more lights appeared, dozens of them, winking in and out of existence across the prairie. Some seemed to be moving closer to where we were parked. "I'm going to call him," Sarah said, pulling out her phone. "No signal. Damn it." "I'll go look for him," I said, reaching for the door handle. Just then, something hit the side of the truck. A heavy thud that made the whole vehicle shake. "What was that?" Melissa whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, we heard footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Slow, deliberate steps circling the truck. I looked out my window but couldn't see anyone. The footsteps stopped at the passenger side door. Then the handle rattled as someone, or something, tried to open it. Sarah let out a small scream and scooted away from the door. "It's just Terry," I said, trying to keep everyone calm, But then I noticed something that made my heart stop. Through the rear window, I could see the outline of a person standing about 20 feet behind the truck, illuminated faintly by our taillights. "Guys," I said, my voice barely audible, "look behind us." We all turned to see the figure. It was clearly a person, and as they moved closer, I could make out that it was Liam. But if that was Terry behind the truck, then who was trying to open the passenger door? The handle rattled again, more violently this time. Sarah was pressed against me now, her fingers digging into my arm. The figure behind the truck, Terry, was waving his arms, frantically, like he was trying to tell us something. "Stay in the truck," I told the girls, my mouth so dry I could barely speak. "Lock the doors after I get out." "Are you crazy?" Sarah hissed. "Don't go out there." But I was already opening my door. I slipped out and immediately felt the cold night air hit me like a physical force. The stars were out now, countless pinpricks of light in the black sky. The wind had died down, and the silence felt heavy and unnatural. I closed my door and heard the locks click behind me. Terry was still standing behind the truck, but he wasn't moving anymore, just staring at me. "Terry?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness. He didn't respond. I took a few steps toward him, and that's when I felt it. A sensation of dread so powerful it nearly brought me to my knees. Everything in me screamed to run, to get back in the truck, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I kept moving toward Terry. As I got closer, I realized something was wrong with his face. It was too dark, too shadowed, even with the faint light from the truck. When I was about 10 feet away, he suddenly turned and sprinted away from the truck, toward the edge of the table formation. "Terry!" I shouted, running after him. I followed him to the edge, where the land dropped off into the badlands below. He had disappeared down a path that wound its way down the side of the formation. I hesitated at the top, looking back at the truck. The girls were watching through the windows. The strange lights were still blinking across the prairie, some of them definitely closer now. Making a decision I would question for years afterward, I started down the path after Terry. The darkness swallowed me as I descended, the starlight not reaching into the shadows of the rock formations. I used my phone's flashlight, casting eerie shadows as I made my way down. I called Terry's name several times, my voice echoing off the rock walls. No response. The path leveled out into a small clearing surrounded by towering rock formations. My flashlight beams swept across the empty space, catching nothing but dust and scrub brush. That's when I heard the scrambling sound, like someone climbing up loose rock. I pointed my light toward the noise and caught a glimpse of movement up the side of one of the formations. It was Terry, struggling to climb up the steep incline. "Terry!" I shouted. "What are you doing? We need to go." He didn't look back, just kept climbing desperately. I moved closer, keeping my light on him. As the beam illuminated more of the scene, I saw something that will haunt me until the day I die. There was something behind Terry. At first, I thought it was his shadow, but it was moving independently of him. A massive black silhouette, easily twice his height, seemed to be flowing over him like a blanket. It had no distinct shape, just darkness deeper than the night around it, and it was pulling at him, trying to envelop him completely. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The thing had no features I could make out, but I could feel it looking at me. The sensation of evil that radiated from it was overwhelming, pure, ancient, and hungry. Terry was fighting against it, clawing at the rocks, trying to climb away. His face was contorted in terror, his eyes wide and pleading when they briefly met mine. Something snapped inside me. I started screaming. Not words, just raw sound tearing from my throat. I don't know why I did it. Maybe some primal part of my brain knew what to do, even if the rest of me was paralyzed with fear. The shadow thing paused. It seemed to recoil slightly from the sound, its formless mass rippling. That moment of hesitation was all Terry needed. He scrambled up the last few feet of the incline and ran toward me, grabbing my arm with a grip so tight it left bruises. "Run!" he gasped. We ran, up the path, slipping and stumbling in the darkness, driven by pure terror. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every fiber of my being was focused on getting away from whatever was down there. We reached the top, sprinting for the truck. The girls saw us coming and unlocked the doors. We piled in, Terry in the driver's seat, hands shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. "Go! Go! Go!" Sarah was screaming, looking out the back window. The engine roared to life, and Terry floored it, sending gravel flying as we tore away from Red Shirt Table. No one spoke for several minutes, just the sound of our panicked breathing filling the truck. When we were about 20 minutes away, Terry finally spoke, his voice hollow. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "What the hell was that, Terry?" I demanded. "What was that thing?" He shook his head, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I was trying to lead it away from you guys. It followed me from my grandfather's place. He warned me it might attach itself to me." "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. "My grandfather has been fighting it for years. It's why he's sick. He told me how to trap it, but Terry's voice broke. "I couldn't do it. It's too strong." We drove back to the reservation in silence. Terry dropped the girls off first, then me. Before I got out of the truck, he grabbed my arm. "Don't tell anyone what you saw," he said, his eyes haunted. "It'll just make it stronger." I nodded, not knowing what else to do. As I watched him drive away, I had the terrible feeling I'd never see my friend again. Not really. Terry changed after that night. He withdrew from everyone, barely left his house. When I did see him, he looked exhausted, like he wasn't sleeping. He'd lost weight, and there was something different about his eyes. They seemed darker, emptier. A year later, almost to the day of our trip to Red Shirt Table, Terry took his own life. He didn't leave a note, just a small bundle wrapped in red cloth on his bedside table. The same bundle he'd taken to make his offering that night. I still don't know what Terry's real intentions were that night. Was he really trying to trap that thing? Or did he have some other purpose for bringing us out there? Sometimes I wonder if he knew what would happen, if he thought he could handle it. Those lights still appear sometimes on the prairie near Red Shirt Table. People on the res talk about them in hushed voices, but no one talks about shadows that move on their own, that hunt in the darkness of sacred places. And on cold nights when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear something scratching at my window, trying to get in. Story 8. I've debated for months whether to share this. My hands are shaking even as I type this out, but I need to tell someone who might actually believe me. I've carried this for too long. It was August 1993. I was working as a forestry surveyor in Vuntut National Park up in Yukon. If you've never been there, it's about as remote as you can get in Canada without hitting the Arctic Circle. Beautiful country, but isolated as hell. I was 29 then, healthy and experienced in the backcountry. I'd been mapping changes in the forest for 3 years already. That morning started like any other during a survey. Clear skies, about 50 degrees. I packed light, just my equipment, maps, notebooks, camera, some food, and water. enough for a day's work before heading back to the temporary base camp. My supervisor had assigned me to check a drainage area after some unusual spring flooding. Around 11 in the morning, I was following this small creek, marking erosion points and vegetation changes on my maps. Nothing unusual. The mosquitoes were bad, but that's just part of the job up there. I still remember slapping at my neck constantly. Wish that had been my biggest problem that day. I first noticed something was off when I saw the trees about a quarter mile ahead. Something about them looked wrong, even from a distance. As I got closer, I realized they were all tilted outward like something had pushed them from a central point. Not knocked over, just leaning at slight angles, all perfectly arranged in a circle. It reminded me of those old photos of Tunguska after the meteorite hit, but on a much smaller scale. I'd seen plenty of strange things in forests, lightning strikes, microbursts, even small sinkholes. But this was different. The arrangement was too perfect, too deliberate. When I reached the edge of whatever had happened there, I stopped cold. Everything inside a perfect circle about 40 yards across was completely white. Not snow white or ash white, but a bone-white color that looked all wrong against the green backdrop of the forest. The trees, bushes, even the ground itself, all drained of color like an old photograph left in the sun too long. I took out my camera immediately and snapped a few pictures from the perimeter. Even though it was midday in summer, the temperatures seemed to drop as soon as I stepped into that circle. The silence hit me next. No birds, no insects, no wind-rustling leaves, just dead silence. The ground felt wrong under my boots. The soil crunched like walking on freeze-dried coffee, brittle and powdery. When I touched one of the white trees, the bark came off in my hand like chalk dust. It wasn't burned. There was no smell of fire. It was like all the moisture and life had been pulled out of everything. I made my way toward the center, taking more photos every few steps. That's when I found the crater. It wasn't large, maybe 3 feet across and 2 feet deep. A perfect circle, like someone had used a giant ice cream scoop to remove a chunk of earth. The inside was the same chalky white as everything else. No meteorite fragments, no scorch marks, nothing to explain what had made it. I crouched down beside it and felt this overwhelming sense of wrongness. The air seemed heavier there, pressing against my skin, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by anything I could see. There was nothing moving in that dead circle, but by something hostile, something that didn't want me there. I've spent my entire career in remote wilderness, faced down bears and survived blizzards. I'm not someone who spooks easily, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. I still don't understand why I didn't listen right away. Instead, I took soil samples and more photographs. I even measured the depth and width of the crater, made sketches in my notebook. Part of me was still the rational surveyor, treating this like any other unusual forest feature. But my hands were trembling the whole time, and sweat was pouring down my back despite the unnatural cold. I spent maybe 20 minutes in that circle. It felt like hours. The whole time, the sense of being observed grew stronger, like the air itself had eyes. When I finally decided to leave, I could swear the stillness had become even more intense, like the forest was holding its breath. As I walked away, I kept looking back over my shoulder. The white circle stood out so starkly against the normal green forest that it should have been visible for quite a distance. But here's the thing that still haunts me. After I'd gone maybe 100 yards and turned to take one last photo, I couldn't see it anymore. The forest just looked normal, as if the white area had vanished. I tried walking back toward where it had been, but couldn't find it again. Eventually, I gave up and continued with my survey route, telling myself I was confused about the location. About 3 hours later, the symptoms started. First, a headache that felt like someone driving nails into my temples. Then stomach cramps so severe I doubled over on the trail. My skin felt hot and cold at the same time, and I was sweating so much my clothes were soaked through. When the vomiting started, I knew I was in serious trouble. I was miles from base camp and rapidly losing the ability to walk straight. I don't remember much about the journey back. I know I abandoned my survey route and took the most direct path to the ranger station we were using as a check-in point. I must have stumbled the last mile or so. One of the rangers later told me I crashed through the door, mumbled something incoherent about white trees, and passed out on the floor. I woke up 2 days later in a hospital in Whitehorse. The doctors told me I had some kind of severe viral infection, probably from an insect bite. They pumped me full of antibiotics and fluids. I tried to tell them about the white circle, but the words wouldn't come out right. My supervisor visited and asked if I remembered what happened. When I mentioned the white area and the crater, he just nodded and said we'd talk about it when I was feeling better. After 5 days, they released me. I was weak but could function. The first thing I did was develop the film from my camera. Every single photo from before I found the white circle came out perfect. Every photo after I left it was fine too. But the ones I took of the white area, nothing but blurry white smudges, like overexposed film, except I knew my camera settings had been correct. When I showed my supervisor the photos and explained what I'd seen, I could tell he didn't believe me. He didn't say it outright, but his expression said everything. He thought I'd hallucinated the whole thing while I was getting sick. My colleagues were the same way. Nobody called me a liar to my face, but I'd catch them exchanging glances when I talked about it. One even suggested that maybe I'd been exposed to some natural gas leak that caused both the hallucinations and the illness. I requested to go back to the area with a team, but my supervisor denied it, saying I needed to recover fully first. By the time I was cleared for fieldwork again, our survey project had moved to a different section of the park. No one ever went back to check. For the next 11 years until I retired in 2004, I carried those blurry white photos with me on every survey trip, hoping I'd find that place again. I never did. I also warned every new forester I trained to be careful out there, to stay away from anything that didn't look right. Most of them probably thought I was just an eccentric old-timer with too many mosquito bites to the brain. The physical symptoms disappeared after a few weeks, but other things lingered. For months after, I'd wake up at night feeling that same sensation of being watched. Food tasted like chalk, and sometimes when I was alone in the forest, I'd get overwhelming waves of dread for no reason, like something was following me just beyond my sight. I'm 60 now and retired from forestry work. I still have those blurry photos in my desk drawer. Sometimes I take them out and look at them, trying to convince myself there must be a rational explanation. A strange fungus, an unknown chemical spill, something that science can explain. But deep down, I know better. Whatever I stumbled across that day in Vuntut wasn't natural. The perfect circle, the bone-white trees, the crater with nothing in it, the way it seemed to disappear when I looked back. None of it fits with anything I learned in my forestry training or experienced in my 30 years of work. I've never gone public with this story before now. What would be the point? I have no proof beyond some blurry photos and my word. But I know what I saw, and sometimes I wonder if whatever made that crater is still out there in those remote woods, still watching, still waiting. And sometimes, when I dream about that white circle, I see the crater growing larger, expanding outward, turning more of the forest into that lifeless, colorless waste. In the worst dreams, it never stops growing. I don't go into the deep woods anymore. I tell people it's because of my knees, but that's not the real reason. Some nights, when the house is quiet and dark, I swear I can hear a sound like brittle leaves crunching under boots. And when I wake up, the air in my bedroom feels just a little too still, a little too cold, like the air around that crater all those years ago. Story 9. I've been working as a forestry technician in Alaska's Tongass National Forest for 6 years now, and until last August, I would have told you I'd seen it all. Bears, wolves, mountain lions. When you're surrounded by 17 million acres of wilderness, encounters with wildlife are just part of the job. But what happened that day, I still can't explain it, and it's changed how I feel about these woods. I used to find comfort in the isolation. Now I'm constantly on edge. It was a Thursday. I remember because I was looking forward to my weekend starting the next day. The weather had been unusually warm for August in southeast Alaska, around 65 degrees and sunny. I'd been out since 7 in the morning, surveying a section about 12 miles from the ranger station, collecting data on tree growth and forest health. Standard stuff. By early evening, I was tired but satisfied with the day's work. I'd found a nice spot by Raven Creek to take a break before heading back. I'd been there many times before. It was one of my favorite spots with a small clearing beside the water where you could sit on some flat rocks. I had my backpack off, was drinking some water, and eating the last of my trail mix when I heard it. At first, I thought nothing of it. Sounds carry in the forest, especially near water. But then I realized what I was hearing wasn't normal. About 50 yards upstream, something was moving through the underbrush. Not like a bear or moose. I know those sounds by heart. This was different, heavier, more deliberate. Each footfall was accompanied by the snap of massive branches. Crack, pause, crack, pause. The rhythm was all wrong for a four-legged animal. Whatever it was seemed to be walking upright, and it was big, much bigger than a bear. I stood up, suddenly alert. My heart started racing, but I tried to stay calm. After all, I'd handled dozens of bear encounters before. "Hey!" I shouted, clapping my hands together hard. "Hey, bear, moving out of your way!" That's standard procedure. Make your presence known, speak in a firm voice, back away slowly. Bears usually want nothing to do with humans. But this thing, it didn't react like a bear. The footfalls stopped for maybe 5 seconds, then continued. Crack, pause, crack. Except now they were coming directly toward me and faster. My mouth went dry. I grabbed my bear spray from my belt and held it ready. "Hey!" I yelled again, much louder this time. "Get out of here!" And then the smell hit me. God, that smell. I've smelled plenty of foul things in the wilderness. Rotting carcasses, stagnant bog water, skunk spray. But this was different. It was sharp, almost metallic, mixed with something sour and putrid. It hit me like a physical force, making me gag and my eyes water. That's when real panic set in. Whatever was coming wasn't stopping, wasn't being scared off. The footfalls were maybe 30 yards away now, and the forest between us was thick with undergrowth and massive old-growth trees. I still couldn't see it, but I could hear branches being pushed aside, saplings snapping like twigs. I didn't think. I just grabbed my backpack, left my water bottle and GPS unit on the ground, and ran. I didn't look back. I just sprinted down the trail like my life depended on it. The heavy footfalls seemed to speed up behind me, but I didn't slow down to confirm. I ran for what felt like forever, but was probably only half a mile before my lungs were burning so badly I had to stop. I bent over, hands on my knees, gasping for air, and finally turned around. The trail behind me was empty. I couldn't hear anything except birds and the distant sound of the creek. The horrible smell was gone, but so was any sense of safety I'd ever felt in these woods. I walked the remaining 5 miles back to my truck as fast as I could, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. It was nearly dark by the time I made it back to the ranger station. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it in my mind, trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. Could it have been a bear walking funny? A moose? But nothing explained the smell or why it came toward me instead of avoiding me. Nothing explained the deliberate bipedal sound of those footsteps. The next morning, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept, couldn't eat. Jim, one of the senior technicians who's been working Tongass for 20 years, noticed something was off and asked me about it in the break room. "You look like hell, Cal," he said, pouring himself coffee. "Something happened out there yesterday?" I hesitated. In forestry, you develop a reputation. The last thing I wanted was to be known as the guy who panics or makes up stories. But Jim's a good guy, and I thought maybe he'd have an explanation. So I told him everything, the sounds, the smell, how it seemed to follow me. As I spoke, his expression changed from concern to skepticism. By the time I finished, he was looking at me like I'd lost my mind. "Sounds like you got spooked by a bear, maybe," he said, but his tone made it clear he thought I was either exaggerating or hallucinating. The smell could have been a skunk or something that died nearby. Your mind plays tricks when you're alone out there too long. I dropped it. What else could I do? I couldn't explain what I'd experienced, and without evidence it just sounded like I'd panicked over nothing. But I knew what I heard, what I smelled. The worst part came later that day. I realized I'd left my GPS unit by the creek, and it had recorded data we needed. I had to go back for it. I convinced one of the junior technicians, Megan, to come with me. Safety in numbers, right? We took a truck out and hiked the trail to Raven Creek. I was on edge the entire time, jumping at every sound, but nothing unusual happened. We found my GPS unit and water bottle right where I'd left them, but something was different. The area around the creek looked disturbed. There were broken branches everywhere, some as thick as my arm. The undergrowth was trampled in a path leading away from the creek into the deeper forest. Megan noticed it too. "Geez, was there a storm out here yesterday?" she asked, looking at the damage. I shook my head. Weather was perfect, not even windy. She frowned, examining a snapped sapling. "Weird. Must have been a big animal then. Bear, maybe?" I just nodded and suggested we leave. I didn't want to be there any longer than necessary. That was 4 months ago. I haven't been back to that section of Raven Creek since. I've rearranged my survey routes to stay closer to the station, to more frequently traveled areas. My colleagues have noticed, but I've made excuses. Efficiency, better data collection opportunities elsewhere. I think Jim might have said something to them, because no one asks me about that day anymore. But I can't forget it. Sometimes at night, I wake up suddenly, thinking I hear that crack. Pause. Crack outside my cabin. Sometimes I catch a whiff of that metallic, sour smell, even though I know it's just my imagination. I've been in these woods long enough to know there are things science hasn't cataloged or fully understood. Native Alaskan traditions speak of creatures in these forests that defy explanation. I used to think those were just stories. Now I'm not so sure. Last week I was organizing some old files and found a report from 1997, before my time here. A different technician reported hearing unusual bipedal movement and smelling a strong, unidentifiable odor in an area about 4 miles from Raven Creek. The report was filed with no follow-up, dismissed as an encounter with a bear. I've been thinking about reaching out to that technician, if they're still around. Maybe compare notes, but part of me is afraid of what I might learn. The thing is, I know these woods. I know the animals that live here and how they behave. What I encountered that day wasn't a bear or a moose or anything I've ever seen documented. It was something else, something that seemed to be curious about me, that approached deliberately when I made noise instead of fleeing. Sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I wonder if it's still out there, moving through the ancient Tongass forest with those heavy, deliberate steps. I wonder if it's looking for me. I still do my job. I still go out into the forest every day, but I carry extra bear spray now. I make more noise. I never stay in one place too long, and I'm always listening for that distinctive sound. Crack, pause, crack. The sound of something impossibly large moving through the woods on 2 legs. Something that, by all rights, shouldn't exist, but that I know with absolute certainty is still out there, somewhere in the 17 million acres of wilderness surrounding me. Story 10. I never believed in ghosts until we moved into that old hotel in Oakwood. God, part of me still can't believe I'm even writing this out. For years I've kept this story to myself because honestly, who would believe it? But I need to tell someone, even if it's just strangers on the internet. Back in 2007, my parents bought this massive old building in Oakwood, Michigan. It used to be a hotel from the late 1800s, and the price was suspiciously low. The previous owner practically couldn't get rid of it fast enough. My parents were ecstatic. They'd always dreamed of owning a historical property, and this place was gorgeous with its wooden banisters, original hardwood floors, and those tall, narrow windows that let in streams of light. From day one, there was something off about the house. Nothing dramatic at first, just little things that made you question your sanity. Footsteps overhead when nobody was upstairs. Shadows that seemed to dart around corners. That constant feeling of being watched when you were alone. We kind of laughed it off, blamed it on the house settling, or our imaginations running wild in such an old building. But the basement, that was different. There was this one room down there that none of us could stand being in for more than a few minutes. The temperature would drop about 10 degrees the moment you stepped through the doorway, and this overwhelming sense of dread would wash over you. Even my dad, who's the most rational person I know, avoided it. We ended up using it for storage and kept the door closed. I moved to Seattle after college, around 2012, so I was away from all this for a few years. I'd call home and my family would casually mention weird stuff happening. The TV turning on by itself, items being moved around overnight. But they talked about it like it was normal, like complaining about the weather. I thought they were just messing with me. Then last October, I came home for a 2-week visit. The first night back, my sister Megan pulled me into her room after dinner. She was 26 at the time, a grown woman with a corporate job, not some impressionable kid. She closed the door and said, "Beck, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to think I'm crazy." I laughed it off, but the serious look on her face stopped me. "We've been talking to a ghost," she said. Just like that, matter of fact. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. According to Megan, about 6 months before, they'd started communicating with someone in the house. It started with the radio in the kitchen. Mom noticed that sometimes when she asked questions out loud, the volume would go up or down on its own. After weeks of experimenting, they established a system. Volume up meant yes, volume down meant no. "This sounds insane," I told her. She just nodded. "It gets weirder," she said. "We figured out a way for him to spell things." The radio had a digital display showing frequencies. They assigned each number from 1 to 26 to a letter of the alphabet and 4 more numbers to represent spaces, periods, and so on. It was painfully slow, but it worked. And that's how they learned his name was Jason. Over months of these bizarre communications, they'd pieced together his story. Jason claimed to be a 5-year-old boy who died of scarlet fever in 1905 while the building was still a hotel. His family had been staying there when he got sick. They couldn't get a doctor in time. I sat on Megan's bed, feeling like I was in some bizarre dream. "You realize how crazy this sounds, right?" She nodded. "That's why we haven't told anyone." Dad was skeptical too, but even he can't explain it anymore. Jason knows things he shouldn't, Beck. Personal things about us that no one could guess. "I want to see it," I said. That night we gathered in the kitchen. Mom, Dad, Megan, and me, sitting around the old radio like it was 1940 or something. I felt ridiculous. Dad looked embarrassed but went along with it. "Jason," Mom called out gently, "are you here? Our daughter Rebecca is home visiting." Nothing happened. The radio stayed silent. "He's shy sometimes," Megan explained. "Jason, can you say hello to Rebecca?" Still nothing. They tried for about 20 minutes while I grew increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, I said, "Look, if there's something here, it clearly doesn't want to talk to me." That's when Megan's eyes widened. "Wait, Beck, do you remember about 5 years ago, before you moved? You told us something scared you in your bedroom one night?" The memory hit me like a truck. I'd been lying in bed, nearly asleep, when I felt something ruffle my hair, like fingers gently playing with it. I'd bolted upright, heart pounding, and yelled into the darkness. I'd threatened whatever it was, told it to leave me alone or else. I was terrified and furious. "You think that was him?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Jason," Mom called out, "was that you who scared Rebecca years ago, the night in her bedroom?" The volume on the radio suddenly increased. "Yes." I felt goosebumps break out across my arms. "Holy shit," I whispered. "Ask him if he's mad at me," I said. Mom repeated my question, and the volume went up again. "Yes?" "I'm sorry," I said directly to the empty air, feeling completely ridiculous, but also genuinely remorseful. "You scared me, and I overreacted. I didn't know you were just a little boy." We waited. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then the radio dial began moving, stopping at different numbers. Megan grabbed a notepad and quickly translated. "Okay," she read aloud. My skin crawled. Over the next few days, Jason seemed to warm up to me. The radio communications became more frequent, especially when I was alone in the kitchen. I found myself talking to him like he was actually there, asking questions about what it was like to be a ghost, if he could see us all the time, if he was lonely. Jason told us he wasn't alone. There was his ghost mother, who was kind but quiet, and there was a father figure he seemed terrified of. Whenever we asked about this evil father, the radio would shut off completely, sometimes for hours. We learned not to bring it up. What really freaked me out was when Jason started manipulating other electronics. The doorbell would ring with no one there. The printer in Dad's office would suddenly spit out pages with single letters printed on them, spelling messages. The TV would flip to specific channels to answer questions. One morning, I was alone in the house and asked Jason if he could see other places outside our house. The radio clicked on by itself and the numbers danced. YES, I translated. ICANGOANYWHERE. Can you tell me what's happening at Megan's workplace right now? I asked, testing him. The radio went silent for about 30 seconds. Then, SHEWERINGBLUEDRESSTALKINGTOMANWITHREDTIE. I called Megan immediately. She went silent when I told her what Jason had said. "Beck," she finally whispered, "I'm wearing a blue dress today. And I was just in a meeting with our CFO who had on a red tie. How could you know that?" "I didn't," I said. "Jason did." By the end of my first week home, I was fully convinced. This wasn't mass hysteria or an elaborate prank. Someone was communicating with us. And as terrifying as that realization was, there was something almost comforting about Jason. He seemed lonely and playful, like an actual child. Then things escalated. On day 9 of my visit, my phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. It simply read, "Hi, Rebecca, it's Jason." I dropped the phone like it was on fire. When I got the courage to pick it up again, I showed my family. Dad immediately called our phone carrier. The number didn't exist, they said. It wasn't registered anywhere. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling, when my phone lit up again. "Don't be scared. I won't hurt you." My fingers shook as I typed back, "How are you doing this?" "It's easy. I can touch anything electronic. I'm getting better at it." "Are you really a little boy who died?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then I was. I'm still me, but different now. Time is different for me. I must have texted with whatever this was for 2 hours that night. Jason told me things about his death, the fever, the pain, how confused he was when he realized he couldn't leave. He mentioned his mother who had also passed and stayed with him. And again, the evil father who seemed to terrify him. When I asked for proof of who he was, he directed us to Old Town records. Dad spent a day at the Historical Society and found documentation of a 5-year-old who died of scarlet fever in the hotel in 1905. The name was different, William, not Jason, but everything else matched perfectly. "Why did you tell us your name was Jason if it was William?" I asked via text the next day. "Father changed my name after. He doesn't like me talking to you." The message sent chills through me. "Who is your father?" No response. My phone turned off completely and wouldn't turn back on for hours, even though the battery had been full. On my last night home, Megan told me something Jason had shared with her months earlier. He said he would stay until her 28th birthday, and then his family would move on to the next phase. When she'd asked what that meant, he'd simply said, "It will be time." I flew back to Seattle the next day, thoroughly shaken by the whole experience. I called home frequently, asking for updates on Jason. The communications continued, texts, radio messages, even emails from non-existent addresses. Jason seemed particularly attached to Megan, often appearing through electronic means when she was upset or needed someone to talk to. Exactly as predicted, on Megan's 28th birthday, March 12, 2018, everything stopped. The radio remained static, no more mysterious texts. The basement room that had always felt so oppressive suddenly felt like just a room. My parents still live in that house. It's been over a year now, and they haven't experienced anything unusual since. We've researched everything we could about the building's history, trying to make sense of what happened. We found records of several deaths in the old hotel, including a suicide in 1910 of a man who had lost his family years earlier. Could that have been the evil father? I don't know what to believe anymore. Was Jason really the ghost of a little boy? Or was he something else entirely? Something that merely presented itself as a child to gain our trust? Whatever was in that house communicated with us for nearly 2 years, demonstrating intelligence and abilities that I still can't explain. Sometimes I check my phone, half expecting to see a message from that non-existent number. "Hi, Rebecca, it's Jason." But there's never anything there. And yet, sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I could swear I feel the lightest touch on my hair, just like all those years ago. Story 11. I still can't sleep some nights. It's been years, but I can't shake what happened. I was a tour guide for Young Pioneer Tours back in late 2015. I'd been leading tours to North Korea for about 3 years by then. You get used to the strict rules, the handlers watching your every move, the script you have to follow. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened with Otto. I first met Otto Warmbier at our pre-trip orientation in Beijing. He was this bright-eyed, friendly University of Virginia student, 21 years old, with this infectious enthusiasm. He stood out right away, asking thoughtful questions, eager to understand the culture, genuinely curious. Not like some tourists who just came for the bizarre bragging rights of having visited the Hermit Kingdom. "Just follow the rules and everything will be fine," I told everyone during orientation. I'd given this speech dozens of times. Don't take photos of military installations, don't disrespect the leaders, don't wander off alone, and absolutely do not try to take propaganda materials. I made eye contact with each person as I said that last part. Otto nodded along with everyone else. Our group arrived in Pyongyang on New Year's Eve. The city was eerily quiet compared to any other capital city during New Year's celebrations. We checked into the Yanggakdo International Hotel, this massive 47-story tower on an island in the middle of the Taedong River. It's basically a containment center for foreigners, designed so tourists can't wander into the real Pyongyang. Everyone calls it the Alcatraz of Pyongyang among guides. During check-in, I gave everyone the standard reminder about the 5th floor. The elevator buttons skip from 4 to 6 for a reason. The 5th floor is restricted. Don't try to access it, I said. Our North Korean minders nodded approvingly. That night we had a group dinner in one of the hotel restaurants. The food was actually pretty good. Korean barbecue, kimchi, and all the fixings. The hotel had put together a New Year's celebration in one of the ballrooms. There was karaoke, some performances by hotel staff, and a surprising amount of alcohol. The North Koreans aren't shy about drinking, and they encouraged our tourists to join in. I remember seeing Otto really enjoying himself, drinking soju with some of the other younger travelers. He was getting pretty drunk, but nothing alarming. Just a college kid having fun on New Year's Eve. Around midnight, we all went outside to watch the fireworks over Pyongyang. It was actually beautiful, the explosions reflecting off the Taedong River. After the fireworks, people started drifting back to their rooms. I made sure everyone got back safely, doing a mental head count as people headed to the elevators. I thought everyone was accounted for. I went to my own room around 1:30 in the morning, exhausted but relieved that another New Year's tour was going smoothly. The next morning, Otto seemed hungover but fine at breakfast. We had a full day of sightseeing, visiting monuments, the captured American spy ship USS Pueblo, and various museums filled with anti-American propaganda. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Otto was engaged, asking questions, taking permitted photos like everyone else. That night, I noticed Otto seemed anxious during dinner. He was quieter than usual, checking his watch frequently. I asked if everything was okay, and he smiled that big Otto smile and said, "Yeah, just tired from last night." I didn't think much of it. 2 days later, we were at Pyongyang International Airport, preparing to leave. Everyone was relieved. No matter how interesting North Korea is, there's always this undercurrent of tension when you're there. The relief of leaving is palpable. We were going through security when I heard some commotion at the checkpoint. I turned and saw 2 North Korean guards flanking Otto. My stomach dropped instantly. One of our North Korean minders approached me with a stern face. "There is problem with this student," he said flatly. "What kind of problem?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Security issue. He cannot leave today." Otto looked terrified. His face had gone completely white. Our eyes met briefly before the guards led him away through a side door. I tried to follow, asking what was happening, what he had done, but our minder blocked my path. "You must take other tourists now. Flight waiting." I had to make an impossible choice in that moment. I had 12 other tourists who needed to get on that plane. If I made a scene, I risked all of them being detained too. The other tourists were looking at me with panic in their eyes. "What about Otto?" one of them asked. "I'll stay behind and sort this out," I said, trying to sound confident. "The rest of you need to get on that plane." But our minder shook his head. "No, all tourists leave. Company send different person for American student problem." I felt sick. I knew what this meant. They weren't going to let me stay and help him. I tried arguing, but was firmly told that any delay would result in complications for everyone. With the heaviest heart I've ever felt, I led the rest of the group onto that plane. I'll never forget looking back at that airport as we took off, knowing I was leaving Otto behind. I kept telling myself it would be okay. Tourists occasionally got detained for a day or two over misunderstandings, then released after some stern warnings. When we landed in Beijing, I immediately called our company headquarters. That's when I learned what they were claiming, that Otto had tried to steal a propaganda poster from the hotel. My blood ran cold. I knew exactly what had happened. He must have gone to the forbidden 5th floor. The 5th floor of the Yanggakdo Hotel isn't on any official tour. It's a bizarre place full of propaganda material, communications equipment, and who knows what else. We'd heard rumors from other guides that curious tourists occasionally found their way there, either by stairs or by pressing the unmarked button on certain elevators. Some guests reported seeing harsh propaganda posters showing nuclear missiles hitting Washington, D.C., American soldiers being killed by North Korean troops, things far more aggressive than what tourists are allowed to see. In the weeks that followed, I cooperated with American officials, telling them everything I could about Otto, our tour, the hotel. I explained about the 5th floor, about the drinking on New Year's Eve. I felt responsible. I should have been more explicit about the dangers, should have watched him more closely. 6 weeks after his arrest, North Korean state television showed Otto at a press conference. He was wearing a light-colored coat, his hair cut in the North Korean style. He read a clearly scripted confession through tears. It was obvious he was under extreme duress. He claimed he had tried to steal the poster for a church member who wanted a souvenir, mentioning something about a secret society at his university. The whole thing was absurd, classic North Korean forced confession material. After a sham 1-hour trial, Otto was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. 15 years! For allegedly taking a poster. I couldn't believe it. I still can't. For 17 months there was diplomatic back and forth trying to get him released. I left Young Pioneer Tours. Couldn't stomach leading tourists there anymore. knowing what had happened. I spent countless nights wondering if Otto was enduring forced labor in some remote camp, if he was being tortured, if he was even alive. Then in June 2017, North Korea suddenly announced they were releasing Otto on humanitarian grounds. They claimed he had contracted botulism and fallen into a coma after taking a sleeping pill. When the medical flight landed in Cincinnati, the truth was far worse than anyone imagined. Otto was in a permanent vegetative state. His parents described him as making inhuman sounds, his eyes opening but unseeing. American doctors found no evidence of botulism, but discovered extensive brain damage consistent with oxygen deprivation. His body showed no obvious signs of physical trauma, but his teeth appeared to have been rearranged with some kind of tool. 6 days after returning home, Otto died. He was 22. I've spent years trying to understand what happened. The most likely explanation is that he was subjected to some form of torture that cut off oxygen to his brain. Possibly waterboarding gone wrong. North Korea doesn't officially acknowledge using torture, but defectors have described horrific methods used in their prison system. What haunts me most is imagining what happened that night. Did Otto, drunk and curious, take the stairs to the 5th floor? Did he see those violent propaganda images and decide impulsively to take one? Or was it a setup from the beginning? North Korea has been known to fabricate charges against foreigners for political leverage. I keep thinking about his face at the airport, that last glimpse before they took him away. He knew he had made a terrible mistake, but he had no idea what was coming. After Otto's death, the U.S. banned Americans from traveling to North Korea. Young Pioneer Tours and other companies stopped taking American clients. Otto's parents established a foundation to help North Korean defectors in his memory. But none of that brings Otto back. None of that erases my guilt for not protecting him better. I know rationally that what happened wasn't entirely my fault. North Korea's brutal system is to blame. But I still wonder if I could have prevented it by being more explicit about the dangers, by checking on everyone more thoroughly that night, by somehow intervening at the airport. Every New Year's Eve, when fireworks explode across whatever sky I'm under, I think of Otto watching those fireworks over Pyongyang, his last moments of joy before everything went so terribly wrong. Story 12. I still can't explain what happened to me 3 weeks ago. I've been debating whether to post this at all, but I need to get it out of my system. Maybe someone has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. I've been hiking solo for about 5 years now. Nothing extreme, just day hikes on established trails within driving distance of my home in Western Oregon. It's always been my way of clearing my head when work gets stressful. I'm an accountant, so during tax season, these hikes are basically what keeps me sane. Last month, I was browsing all trails looking for somewhere new to explore. I'd done most of the popular spots within an hour's drive, but then I noticed this trail I'd never heard of before, Black Pine Loop. It wasn't rated highly, only 2.5 stars, and had very few reviews, but the photos showed dense forest with these massive old pines that looked incredible. The trail description said it was about 5 miles total, moderately difficult, with some elevation gain. Perfect for a Saturday morning. That Saturday, I woke up around 6, made coffee, packed my usual day pack with water, protein bars, first aid kit, and rain shell. I remember specifically checking the weather. Partly cloudy, high of 68 degrees. I even remember the drive there, listening to a true crime podcast about some cold case from the 90s. The directions took me down this narrow county road I'd never been on before, then onto a gravel Forest Service road for maybe 2 miles. The parking area wasn't much, just a small gravel clearing with space for maybe 5 cars. Mine was the only one there. I remember getting out of my car around 8:30 in the morning. The air felt heavy, like it might rain later despite the forecast. There was this old wooden sign marking the trailhead, so faded I could barely make out Black Pine Loop carved into it. The trail itself was overgrown, but visible enough to follow. I adjusted my backpack, started my All Trails recording, and headed in. I remember walking maybe 50 yards into the forest, the ground soft with layers of pine needles, the morning light filtering through the trees, and then nothing. My next memory is driving my car, coming down the mountain as the sun was setting. I was about 15 minutes from home when I suddenly woke up, not from sleep because I was actively driving, but it was like suddenly becoming aware of myself again. I nearly swerved off the road from the shock. I pulled over immediately, heart racing, completely disoriented. My watch said it was 7:23 p.m. Nearly 11 hours had passed, and I had no memory whatsoever of hiking the trail, returning to my car, or driving most of the way home. At first, I thought I must have fallen and hit my head, but I had no pain, no visible injuries. I checked my phone. The All Trails recording had stopped after just 10 minutes, showing I'd only gone about half a mile into the trail. There were no photos on my phone from the day. My water bottles were almost empty, and I'd eaten 2 of my 3 protein bars. When I got home, I noticed the state of my hiking boots. They were caked with mud and covered in pine needles, clearly showing I'd been hiking for hours. My clothes weren't torn or dirty beyond what you'd expect from a normal hike, but my muscles were sore like I'd really pushed myself. I barely slept that night. I kept trying to remember anything, any fragment of the day, but there was just this complete blank. It wasn't like the fuzzy memory after a night of drinking. It was a total absence, like someone had surgically removed those hours from my mind. The next day I called my doctor and explained what happened. She got me in that afternoon, concerned I might have suffered a concussion or some kind of neurological event. She ran tests, checked my pupils, tested my reflexes and coordination. Everything came back normal. No signs of concussion, no indications of a seizure. She suggested stress and fatigue might have caused a dissociative episode and recommended I follow up with a neurologist if it happened again. But that explanation didn't sit right with me. I've been stressed before. Who hasn't? But I've never lost an entire day. And I felt fine that morning, actually better than usual. A few days later, I started researching Black Pine Loop online, hoping to find something that might trigger my memory. Most of the information was pretty basic. Trail stats, a few unremarkable reviews complaining about poor maintenance. But then I found an old forum post from 7 years ago. The poster described hiking Black Pine Loop alone in late fall. They didn't mention memory loss, but they wrote about feeling increasingly uneasy as they progressed through the trail. About 2 miles in, they came across a section where the trees looked wrong, diseased and twisted in unnatural ways. They described the silence as absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind through the trees. They ended up turning back before completing the loop, unable to shake the feeling they were being watched. Reading this sent chills through me. What had I encountered on that trail? Had I seen the same twisted trees? Had I felt that same unnatural silence? And if so, why couldn't I remember any of it? I've been trying to move on, but strange things have been happening since my hike. Sometimes I'll catch myself staring blankly at a wall or out a window, completely zoned out. My girlfriend noticed it first when we were having dinner last week. She said I stopped mid-sentence and just stared past her for nearly a minute, not responding when she called my name. When I came back, I had no idea it had happened. It's happened 3 more times since then. Once while driving, terrifying, once at work, and once while brushing my teeth. Each time, it feels like I'm slipping back into that same blank state that swallowed my day at Black Pine Loop. I've also been having this recurring dream. I'm walking through pine trees, the ground soft beneath my feet. Everything is quiet, too quiet. Then I come to a clearing where the trees around the perimeter are bent and twisted, their trunks almost black. In the center of the clearing stands something I can never quite see clearly. It's tall, taller than the trees, but somehow blended with them. I always wake up just as I think it's turning toward me. Yesterday, I found something that's pushed me to finally write this all down. I was emptying the pockets of my hiking pants before washing them and found a small object I don't recognize. A smooth black stone about the size of a quarter, but oddly lightweight. When I hold it, it feels almost warm, and there's a faint pattern etched into it that looks like concentric circles. I have no memory of picking this up, no idea where it came from, but seeing it triggered something. Not a memory exactly, but a feeling. Pure, overwhelming dread. I dropped it immediately, and my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't pick it up again for several minutes. The stone is sitting on my desk as I write this. I've thought about throwing it away, but something stops me each time I try. It's like it's important somehow, like it holds the key to what happened during those missing hours. I've decided not to go back to Black Pine Loop, at least not alone. Part of me wants answers, wants to reclaim those lost hours, but a deeper part is terrified of what I might find. What if I go back and lose more than just time? What if I don't come back at all? I keep telling myself there must be a rational explanation. Maybe I did hit my head and just don't remember it. Maybe I had some kind of stress-induced blackout. But then I look at that strange black stone, and I know something else happened in those woods, something my mind has chosen to protect me from remembering. Last night, I woke up at exactly 3:13 a.m., drenched in sweat, with a single clear memory that hadn't been there before, standing at the edge of a perfect circle in the forest where nothing grows, not trees, not moss, not even the smallest blade of grass, just bare, black earth, and the overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. I don't know what to do with this fragment of memory. Was it real, or just my mind trying to fill in the blanks? All I know is that something happened to me at Black Pine Loop, something I still can't fully remember, and I'm terrified that whatever it was isn't finished with me yet. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Has anyone else hiked Black Pine Loop and felt that something was wrong there? I need to understand what happened to me during those missing hours before I lose more pieces of myself to whatever waits in those woods. Story 13. I never believed in the supernatural before my mission. Growing up Mormon, I believed in spiritual things, sure, but not monsters or creatures or anything that went bump in the night. That all changed during my time on the reservation. Even now, 5 years later, I still get chills thinking about what happened there. I've only shared this with a few close friends and family members, but I need to get this off my chest. My name is Elijah, and I was assigned to the Northern Arizona mission, specifically to work on a remote Native American reservation. I was excited at first. It felt like a unique opportunity to share my faith in a place most missionaries didn't get to serve. My companion, Elder Thompson, and I were the only missionaries assigned to that area, covering hundreds of square miles of sparse population. That night in October started like any other. We'd visited a family about 20 miles from our apartment who had expressed interest in learning more about our church. The lesson went well, and we didn't realize how late it had gotten until we were heading back around 9:30 p.m. The reservation has strict rules about non-residents being out after dark, but we had special permission as missionaries. I noticed our gas gauge was dangerously low about halfway back. I hadn't filled up before we left, thinking we had enough to make the round trip. Stupid mistake. Elder Thompson started getting anxious. There were no gas stations for miles, and cell service was practically non-existent. The roads were completely dark, no street lights, just our headlights cutting through the blackness. We spotted a single house with lights on about a quarter mile off the main road. I remember feeling uncomfortable about stopping, but we didn't have much choice. An older man answered, and after explaining our situation, he generously gave us a small gas can with enough to get back. He seemed friendly enough, but something about the way he looked at us made me uneasy. Right before we left, he said something I'll never forget. "Stay on the main road tonight. Don't stop for nothing." Elder Thompson fell asleep almost immediately after we got back in the car. He had a talent for sleeping anywhere, anytime. I was left alone with my thoughts, driving through pitch blackness with nothing but our headlights illuminating the cracked asphalt ahead. The radio didn't work well out there, just static, so I turned it off and drove in silence. About 15 minutes into the drive, I realized I'd taken a wrong turn. The roads all looked the same at night, and I'd ended up on one of the back routes. It would still get us home eventually, but it was narrower, more winding, and completely deserted. I considered waking Thompson to help navigate, but decided to let him sleep. I was going about 40 miles per hour, careful not to go too fast on the unfamiliar road. That's when I first noticed movement in my peripheral vision. At first, I thought it was just wildlife, maybe coyotes or deer alongside the road. But something felt off. The movement was too steady, too deliberate. I squinted, trying to see better without turning my head too much. Whatever it was, it seemed to be keeping pace with the car. I remember thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it was just shadows from the trees along the roadside. I turned my head slightly to get a better look. My heart nearly stopped. Running alongside the car, matching our speed perfectly, was what looked like a person on all fours. But it wasn't moving like a human would when crawling. It was galloping, like some grotesque hybrid of human and animal. Its limbs were too long, joints bending at unnatural angles. In the split second I looked, I could make out a vaguely human shape, but everything about the way it moved was wrong. I jerked my head forward, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind raced to make sense of what I'd seen. It couldn't be real. It had to be a trick of the light, or my imagination running wild in the darkness. But when I glanced in the side mirror, I saw it again. And not just one. There were several of them, at least 6 figures, running alongside us, easily keeping pace with a car, going 40 miles per hour. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. Thompson jolted awake beside me. "What's wrong? Why are we stopping?" he asked, voice groggy with sleep. I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was closing up. I just stared straight ahead, afraid to look out the windows. Thompson put his hand on my shoulder, asking if I was okay. Finally, I managed to whisper, "Pray. We need to pray right now." Thompson must have seen the terror on my face because he didn't question me. He started praying immediately, asking for protection and safety. While he prayed, I gathered my courage and looked out the windows. Nothing. The road was empty. After the prayer, Thompson asked what happened. I couldn't bring myself to tell him yet. I just said I thought I saw something on the road and got spooked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the car back in drive. The rest of the journey, I drove in complete silence, eyes locked straight ahead, refusing to look at the mirrors or windows. Thompson kept asking if I was okay, but I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Every few minutes I'd catch flickers of movement in my peripheral vision, but I refused to look directly at them. When we finally pulled into our apartment complex, I was drenched in sweat despite the cool October air. Only then, in the safety of our parking lot with other cars and streetlights around us, did I tell Thompson what I'd seen. "There were things running beside the car," I said, my voice trembling. "Human-shaped, but on all fours. They were keeping pace with us at 40 miles per hour, 6 of them at least." Thompson stared at me for a long moment, then said something that chilled me to the bone. "The locals have stories about those." He explained that one of our investigators had told him about creatures that roamed the reservation at night. The locals called them skinwalkers or something similar. I don't want to use the actual term out of respect. They were said to be evil entities that could run faster than cars and mimic human voices. I barely slept that night, and in the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. A week later, we were assigned to spend a few days in a small trailer on a remote part of the reservation to meet with potential investigators in that area. The first night there, around 2 in the morning, we were awakened by loud knocking on our door. 3 distinct knocks, then silence. Thompson and I both sat up in our beds, looking at each other in the darkness. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He nodded, his face pale in the moonlight streaming through the window. The knocks came again, 3 more, slightly louder this time. Protocol said we should always answer the door. It could be someone in need, but something felt wrong. Very wrong. "Don't open it," I whispered. We sat in complete silence for what felt like hours. The knocking came 2 more times, then stopped. Eventually, we fell into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, we found footprints circling our trailer. Bare human footprints, but with toes that seemed too long, too spread out. They made a complete circle around our temporary home, as if whatever made them had been pacing around us all night. That was just the beginning. Over the next few months, strange incidents kept happening. One evening, while teaching a lesson to a family, I glanced out their window and saw what looked like an elongated human figure watching us from between the trees. When I blinked, it was gone. Another time, we returned to our car after a lesson to find handprints made of dirt on the driver's side door. The fingers in the prints were unnaturally long and thin. During a thunderstorm, we heard what sounded like whistling coming from outside our apartment. Not random whistling, but a distinct pattern that repeated 3 times before stopping. Each incident left me more unnerved than the last. I started having trouble sleeping, jumping at every sound in the night. Thompson seemed less affected, often trying to rationalize what was happening or attributing it to local wildlife. The final incident happened during my last transfer on the reservation. We were driving back from a lesson, later than usual again. The sun had just set, and darkness was falling quickly. I was behind the wheel, Thompson beside me reading scripture passages for our next lesson. As we rounded a bend in the road, I saw them. Several dark silhouettes alongside the road, standing upright this time. My headlights caught them for just a moment, but it was enough to see they weren't normal people. Their proportions were wrong, limbs too long, heads slightly misshapen. I slowed down, my instinct telling me to turn around. But then one of them stepped directly into the road about 50 yards ahead, standing perfectly still, blocking our path. Thompson looked up from his scriptures. "Why are we stopping?" "There's someone in the road," I said, my voice barely audible. He squinted into the darkness. "I don't see anyone." The figure stood perfectly still, silhouetted against the asphalt. I could feel it watching us, even from that distance. In that moment, something changed in me. After months of fear, of being watched and followed, something snapped. Instead of stopping or turning around, I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, picking up speed, 30 miles per hour, 40, 50. The figure remained motionless until we were about 20 yards away. Then, its body jerked, almost as if it was surprised by my challenge. At the last possible second, it leapt with inhuman speed to the side of the road, vanishing into the darkness. Thompson grabbed the dashboard, shouting at me to slow down. I did, hands shaking, adrenaline coursing through me. "What the hell was that about?" he demanded. I couldn't explain it. Not really. It was as if some primal part of me had decided that if I was going to be hunted, I wasn't going down without a fight. I finished my mission 2 weeks later, transferred to a different area for my final days. I never told my mission president the full extent of what happened. How could I? It sounded crazy, even to me. That was 5 years ago. I've never gone back to the reservation, though I sometimes think about the people we taught there. I wonder if they're safe, if they know how to protect themselves from what roams their land at night. I still can't explain what those things were. All I know is what I saw. Humanoid figures that could run alongside a car going 40 miles per hour, that circled our trailer at night, that left handprints with fingers too long to be human. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear 3 distinct knocks on my door. And sometimes when I'm driving alone on dark roads, I find myself checking my peripheral vision, half expecting to see those figures running alongside me once again. Story 14. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened last week. I've barely slept since then, and honestly, I'm scared to be alone in my apartment now. I've never experienced anything like this before. I live in Lakeshore, a quiet little town where nothing ever happens. My apartment is on the 2nd floor of an older building. Nothing fancy, but it's been home for the past 3 years. I've always felt safe here. The neighbors are mostly older folks who keep to themselves, and the building has decent security with the main entrance locked after 8 p.m. Last Thursday night, we had this massive thunderstorm. I remember because it had been building all day, that heavy, oppressive feeling in the air where you just know something's about to break. Around 10 o'clock, the storm finally hit with full force. Rain was coming down in sheets, and the thunder was so loud it made my windows rattle. I was curled up on my couch with a blanket, watching some true crime show on Netflix. The combination of the storm outside and the creepy show probably wasn't the best idea, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. My living room faces the street, and my bedroom overlooks the back parking lot. It's a simple layout: kitchen, living room, bathroom, and bedroom. Nothing special. I remember I had just made some tea and was completely engrossed in my show when I heard it. A loud, deliberate knock on my door. 3 sharp raps. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. It was 10 at night during a thunderstorm after all. Who would be visiting? I paused my show and listened. Nothing. Just as I was about to hit play again, it came again. 3 more knocks, even louder this time. My heart started racing immediately. I wasn't expecting anyone, and none of my friends would show up unannounced, especially not this late during a storm. I sat frozen on my couch, staring at the door. Maybe it's a neighbor needing help, I thought, trying to calm myself down, but something felt off. The knocking was too deliberate, too confident for someone in distress. I slowly got up and tiptoed to the door, making sure not to make any noise. We have peepholes in our doors, thank God. I pressed my eye against it, expecting to see maybe my elderly neighbor from across the hall who sometimes gets confused. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. A man was standing there, completely still, staring directly at my door. Not at the peephole, but just at the door itself, like he was waiting patiently. He was dressed all in black, a dark coat that was soaking wet from the rain. His hair was long, black, and plastered to his face from the water. Even through the distorted peephole view, I could tell something was wrong with how he was standing. Too rigid, too still. I backed away from the door as quietly as possible, my heart pounding so loud I was afraid he might hear it through the door. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? But for what? A stranger knocking on my door. That's not exactly an emergency. I decided to just wait it out. Maybe he had the wrong apartment and would leave. Then the third knock came. Louder, more insistent. I held my breath. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in my living room, but it felt like forever. Eventually, I heard footsteps moving away from my door. I waited another minute before creeping back to the peephole. The hallway was empty. I let out a shaky breath and returned to my couch, but I couldn't focus on my show anymore. I turned off the TV and just sat there listening. The storm was still raging outside, thunder occasionally shaking the building. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting the knocking to start again. After about an hour of sitting there, jumping at every noise, I finally decided I was being ridiculous. The guy was probably just at the wrong apartment, or maybe he was delivering something, though 10 p.m. seemed like a strange time for deliveries. I tried to rationalize it, but couldn't shake the image of him standing there, soaking wet, staring at my door. I was exhausted, but still on edge. I decided to try to get some sleep. Maybe things would make more sense in the morning. I did a thorough check of all my locks, front door, balcony door, windows, before heading to my bedroom. I even pushed a chair against the front door, feeling silly but doing it anyway. My bedroom was dark except for the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated everything in a harsh white light. I was about to close my blinds. I always closed them before bed, when a lightning flash caught my attention. Something moved in the parking lot below. I pressed closer to the window, trying to see through the rain-streaked glass. The parking lot was poorly lit, with just one lamppost that cast an orange glow over the nearest cars. The rest was shrouded in darkness, but when the next lightning flash came, I saw him. The same man from my door was standing in the middle of the parking lot, in the pouring rain, looking directly up at my window, directly at me. I gasped and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my bedside table. This couldn't be happening. How did he know which window was mine? Why was he just standing there in the downpour? He wasn't seeking shelter, wasn't moving toward the building or away from it, just watching. When I gathered enough courage to look again, another flash of lightning confirmed he was still there, still staring. Rain poured down his face, his clothes completely soaked through, but he didn't seem to care or even notice. He was completely focused on my window. I slammed the blinds shut and backed away, fumbling for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. Who do I call? What do I say? There's a man standing in the rain looking at my apartment. It sounded so stupid, but it felt so threatening. I decided to call my friend Emma, who lives about 15 minutes away. She picked up on the third ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Victoria, what's wrong? It's almost midnight." I tried to explain what was happening without sounding completely insane. "There's a man. He knocked on my door earlier, and now he's standing in the parking lot staring at my window. I'm scared, Em." She was instantly alert. "Have you called the police?" "No, What would I even say? He's not doing anything technically illegal." "Vic, if you feel threatened, that's enough. Call them." I peeked through a tiny gap in my blinds. Another lightning flash. He was still there, still staring, completely motionless, except for his hair and clothes whipping in the wind. "I think I will," I told Emma. Can you stay on the phone with me?" She did, bless her, while I called the police on my landline. I explained the situation, feeling stupid the entire time. The dispatcher was kind, but not particularly concerned. She said they'd send someone to drive by, but it wasn't a high priority since he wasn't actively trying to break in. I thanked her and went back to Emma on my cell. "They're sending someone, but who knows when they'll get here?" she asked. I glanced at the window again. The thought of Emma driving over and potentially encountering this man terrified me more than being alone. No, stay home, I'm okay. I've locked everything." We talked for a while longer. I couldn't stop myself from checking the window every few minutes. He remained there, standing in the same spot, for over an hour. The storm was beginning to ease up, the rain lighter now, the thunder more distant. Emma eventually fell asleep on the phone. I couldn't blame her. It was nearly 2 in the morning. I was exhausted, but too wired to sleep. I sat on my bed, back against the headboard, staring at the blinds. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke with a start at 5:30 in the morning. The storm had passed, and early morning light was filtering through my blinds. Emma had hung up at some point. With shaking hands, I approached the window and slowly, carefully peeked through the blinds. The parking lot was empty, just puddles reflecting the pale morning sky and a few cars. No sign of the man. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding and sank to the floor, relief washing over me. Maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe it was worse in my head than reality. The police never called me back, so I assume they either never came by or didn't see anything when they did. I spent the next day at Emma's place. I couldn't bear to be alone in my apartment. She tried to convince me it was probably just some drunk guy who got the wrong building, or maybe someone playing a stupid prank. But I can't shake what I saw. The deliberate way he knocked, the way he stood in the pouring rain for hours, staring up at my window. There was something so unnatural about his stillness, his patience, his determination. It's been a week now, and I haven't seen him again. I've installed additional locks on my doors and windows. I keep my blinds closed at all times. I'm considering moving, but my lease isn't up for another 6 months. Every night when it gets dark, I feel the same dread creeping back. Every noise in the hallway makes me freeze. I find myself constantly checking the parking lot from behind my blinds. Who was he? What did he want? Why did he stand in the pouring rain for hours just staring at my window? These questions haunt me. The worst part is not knowing if he'll come back. Is he watching me right now, waiting for the right moment? Was that night just a warning of some kind? A message? I don't know. And that uncertainty is slowly eating away at me. All I know is that something about that night felt deeply wrong in a way I can't explain. It wasn't just a strange encounter, it felt like something else. Something I don't have words for. I just hope I never hear those 3 knocks on my door again. Story 15. I've never shared this story with anyone outside my family before. Even typing it up now makes my hands shake, but I need to get this out there. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. Maybe I'm not crazy. I grew up in a small town in rural Tennessee where everyone knew everyone else's business. My family was one of the oldest in the community, and we had our share of traditions and superstitions that got passed down through generations. Most of them were harmless. Don't put shoes on the table, don't sweep at night, that kind of stuff. But there was one that my great-grandmother was particularly serious about. Never play cards on Sunday, or the devil will get you Monday, she'd say with such conviction that even as a kid, I knew she wasn't just being dramatic. She had another rule too. Never leave playing cards out on the table when you're done, or the devil will come play with them. As a kid, I rolled my eyes whenever she'd start in with her warnings. My parents weren't quite as strict about it, but they respected her rules when we were at her house. And every summer, that's exactly where we'd be for our annual family reunion. Great-grandma's farmhouse was this massive 2-story place built in the 1920s. It had these creaky wooden floors and too many rooms to count. During family gatherings, all the cousins would sleep on the living room floor, while the adults stayed up late in the kitchen playing cards. Usually poker, sometimes rummy, always for money, though they'd pretend it wasn't gambling if the kids asked. This particular gathering happened the summer I turned 13. It was a stifling hot July weekend, and about 20 family members had squeezed into the old house. Air conditioning was limited to a few window units, so we all sweated through the days and hoped for cool breezes at night. Saturday night was always the big night for card games. The adults had been playing since dinner ended around 7, and by midnight they were still going strong. Me and 4 of my cousins, Matt, 15, Jenny, 14, Tim, 11, and little Robbie, 8, were laid out on sleeping bags in the living room, pretending to be asleep whenever an adult walked through. Around 1 in the morning, we heard chairs scraping against the floor and the adults talking about calling it a night. Uncle Dave had apparently cleaned everyone out, and Aunt Sarah was complaining about losing $50. They all shuffled off to their respective sleeping quarters, leaving the kitchen dark and silent. That's when the 5 of us really started talking, huddled in our sleeping bags and whispering about school and video games and which girls Matt liked. The usual kid stuff. The house had settled into that deep nighttime quiet where even the smallest sounds seem amplified. The tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, the occasional creak of the house frame expanding or contracting. It must have been around 2 in the morning when we first heard it. A fluttering sound, like when you hold playing cards and shuffle them through your fingers. We all froze mid-conversation. "What was that?" Jenny whispered. "Probably just the blinds," Matt said. "Wind must be picking up." But I remember looking at the windows. The blinds were completely still. There wasn't a breeze at all that night. It was one of those suffocatingly still summer evenings. The sound came again. Flut, 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 like cards being riffled. "It's coming from the kitchen," Tim whispered. We all strained to listen, and sure enough, there was another sound. A soft sliding noise, like cards being dealt across a table. Someone's still up playing, I suggested, though I knew we'd watched every adult go to bed. I'm gonna check, Matt said, always trying to be the brave one. He got up and peered around the corner into the kitchen. After a second, he came back shaking his head. No one's there. Kitchen's dark. We tried to go back to our conversation, but every few minutes that fluttering sound would return. Sometimes it was accompanied by a soft tapping, like fingernails drumming on the tabletop. Around 3 a.m, I had to pee. The main bathroom was down the hall past the kitchen, and I really didn't want to go alone, but I also didn't want to seem like a baby in front of my cousins. I'm going to the bathroom, I announced, trying to sound casual. Want me to come with you? Jenny offered, but I shook my head. I'm good. The hardwood floor was cold under my bare feet as I padded through the living room. The kitchen doorway loomed ahead, a rectangle of deeper darkness. As I approached, I could make out the silhouette of the table and chairs against the dim light coming through the window. I hurried past, did my business in the bathroom, and washed my hands. On the way back, something made me pause at the kitchen doorway. Maybe it was a slight movement I caught from the corner of my eye, or maybe it was just that prickling sensation on the back of my neck. Either way, I found myself frozen, staring at the kitchen table. In the faint moonlight coming through the window, I could see the deck of cards, but they weren't scattered across the table where the adults had left them. They were arranged in a perfect fan pattern, like someone had deliberately laid them out for display. And right in the middle of the fan, turned face up while all the others were face down, was the Jack of Spades. I remember staring at that card, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was something wrong with the face on the Jack. The features seemed twisted, distorted somehow. The mouth was stretched into a grin that was too wide, almost reaching the edges of the card. And the eyes, they seemed to be looking directly at me. I blinked hard, and when I looked again, the card appeared normal, just a regular Jack of Spades. But I knew what I'd seen. I backed away, then turned and ran back to the living room, diving into my sleeping bag. My cousins immediately noticed something was wrong. What happened? Matt asked. You look like you saw a ghost. Between panicked breaths, I told them about the cards on the table, about how they'd been arranged, and about the Jack of Spades with its distorted face. The adults probably just left them like that, Jenny suggested, but her voice was uncertain. No, I insisted. They were all scattered when everyone went to bed. I saw Uncle Dave throw his cards down when he won the last hand. I'm having bad dreams, Tim suddenly whispered. We all turned to look at him. He was sitting up in his sleeping bag, hugging his knees to his chest. What kind of dreams? Jenny asked. About a man, a tall man with a weird smile. He was standing over me, watching me sleep. An icy chill ran down my spine. I had the same dream, Robbie piped up, his small voice trembling. He was wearing a hat, and his face was all wrong. That was it for us. We scrambled up from our sleeping bags and split up, each running to wherever our parents were sleeping. I found my mom and dad in the guest room and crawled into bed between them, not even caring when they grumbled about me being too old for this. I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening for that fluttering sound. But the house was silent until dawn broke and people started waking up. At breakfast, no one mentioned the cards. The adults were all busy nursing hangovers and packing up to leave. I wanted to say something, but what would I say? That I thought the devil had been playing cards in great-grandma's kitchen. They'd just laugh it off. We were loading up the car when Robbie tugged on my sleeve. His face was pale and he was clutching something in his small hand. What's wrong? I asked. Without a word, he opened his palm to reveal a single playing card, the Jack of Spades. "It was under my pillow," he whispered. "I didn't put it there." I stared at the card, at the face that now looked completely normal in the morning sunlight, but I remembered what I'd seen in the darkness, that twisted grin, those watching eyes. "Give it to me," I said, taking the card from him. I didn't know what to do with it, but I knew I didn't want Robbie keeping it. Later that day, when we got home, I took the card out to our backyard fire pit and burned it, watching as the flames consumed the paper, the face of the Jack disappearing into ash. I'm 32 now, and to this day, I refuse to have playing cards in my house. If I'm at someone else's home and they bring out a deck, I make some excuse to leave before dark. And I've never, not once, played cards on a Sunday. Some might call it superstition, but I know what I saw that night. I know what Robbie and Tim dreamed about. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night and the house is quiet, I swear I can hear that soft, fluttering sound, like cards being shuffled in empty rooms. Great-grandma wasn't just being superstitious, she was warning us. And I wish I knew what happened to her to make her so certain about those rules. What did she see? What did she experience? She passed away a year after that incident, taking whatever knowledge she had with her. All I know is that something was in that kitchen that night, something that shouldn't have been there, something that arranged those cards and turned up the Jack of Spades, something that visited my cousins in their dreams. And sometimes I wonder if burning that card really got rid of it, or if it's still out there somewhere, waiting for another game to join. Story 16. I still get chills thinking about what happened to me last summer. It was a Friday in July, and I'd just finished my shift at the dental office where I work as a receptionist. I was supposed to meet my friend Jessica at her new apartment for a housewarming thing. Nothing fancy, just a few of us hanging out. She'd moved to this place called Westlake Heights about a month before, and I'd never been there. I remember being really tired after work. It had been one of those days where every patient seemed to be in a bad mood, and my boss had dumped a pile of insurance paperwork on me right before I left. All I wanted was to relax with friends, have a glass of wine, and forget about work for a while. So I got in my car around 6:30, put Jessica's address into Google Maps, and started driving. I was about 15 minutes into my drive when my phone suddenly shut off. I grabbed it and kept pressing the power button, but nothing happened. My phone was completely dead, which was weird because I'd charged it during lunch. Later, I found out there was some kind of battery issue with my model, but in that moment I was just annoyed and a little worried. I didn't know Westlake Heights well at all. It's this newer development about 30 minutes outside of town with a bunch of apartment complexes and subdivisions. Without my phone for directions, I was pretty much lost. I knew the general area, but not the specific streets or which complex was Jessica's. After driving around aimlessly for a few minutes, I spotted a gas station and pulled in. I figured I could ask for directions, or at least charge my phone for a bit if they had an outlet I could use. The place was one of those older gas stations with just a couple of pumps and a small convenience store attached. Not the nice, brightly lit chain stores, but one of those independent places that sells expired chips and warm beer. Inside, there was just one employee, a teenage girl who was glued to her phone behind the counter. When I asked if she knew where Ridgewood Apartments in Westlake Heights was, she just shrugged and said she didn't know the area that well. She lived in the opposite direction. She did offer to let me use their phone, but I realized I didn't even know Jessica's number by heart. It was all saved in my contacts. I was standing there trying to figure out what to do when this man approached me. He was tall, maybe 6'2", completely bald with a thin beard. He was wearing jeans and a dark blue button-up shirt. Nothing that stood out as creepy at first glance, but something about his smile didn't seem right. It was too eager, I guess. "Excuse me," I couldn't help overhearing. "Did you say Ridgewood Apartments?" he asked. I nodded, and he smiled wider. "I know exactly where that is. My sister lived there until last month." Relief washed over me. Finally, someone who could help. "Could you tell me how to get there? My phone died, and I'm completely lost." "Of course," he said. "It's a bit tricky to explain, though. Let me write it down for you." He asked the cashier for a pen, and she handed him one. He grabbed a flyer from a stack near the register and started writing directions on the back of it. As he wrote, he kept glancing up at me, still with that weird smile. He asked my name, and without thinking I told him. "Cassie, right? The apartments can be hard to find, especially at dusk. They're tucked away behind some trees." His voice was smooth, almost practiced. "You driving by yourself?" That question set off a tiny alarm bell in my head, but I brushed it off. He was just being friendly, I told myself. Still, I lied and said my boyfriend was meeting me there. He handed me the flyer with the directions written on the back. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, with specific turns and street names. "This should get you there perfectly. It's about 15 minutes from here." I thanked him and headed back to my car. As I was getting in, I noticed him watching me from inside the store. Our eyes met briefly through the window, and he gave me a small wave. I waved back automatically and got in my car. Following his directions, I turned right out of the gas station, then made a series of turns onto progressively smaller roads. At first, everything seemed fine. I was on normal residential streets, but after about 10 minutes, I realized I was heading away from where I thought Westlake Heights should be. The houses became more spaced out, and soon I was driving through areas with dense woods on both sides of the road. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter, telling myself maybe this was just a shortcut. The directions were specific. Turn left after the big oak with the broken branch, right at the faded yellow mailbox. Things like that. Very detailed, which made me trust them more than I should have. The final turn on his instructions led me onto a narrow gravel driveway. It curved through some trees, and when I came out on the other side, I was facing a house. Not an apartment complex, a house. A single 2-story house sitting alone in a small clearing, surrounded by woods. It looked normal. Not abandoned or creepy, just a regular house with lights on inside. But it was definitely not Ridgewood Apartments. I stopped the car, about halfway up the driveway, and felt my stomach drop. Something was very wrong. I checked the directions again, thinking maybe I'd made a mistake, but no, I'd followed them perfectly. This was where he had directed me to go. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. Maybe he'd made an honest mistake, but the directions were so specific, with landmarks that only someone familiar with these back roads would know. And why would he send me to a house when I clearly asked for an apartment complex? I put the car in reverse, deciding to get the hell out of there and find my way back to the main road. That's when headlights appeared behind me, illuminating my car's interior. Another vehicle had pulled into the driveway, blocking my exit. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I watched in my rearview mirror as the driver's door opened, and a tall figure stepped out. Even in the dim light, I could tell immediately who it was, the bald man from the gas station. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He had deliberately given me directions to this isolated house, and then he had followed me here. This wasn't random. This was planned. He started walking toward my car, moving quickly. I could see him clearly now in my headlights, that same smile on his face, but it looked completely different out here in the darkness. I remember my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. He was heading for my passenger side door, not directly approaching my window, which somehow made it even more terrifying. It was like he thought I'd unlocked the door for him, like he expected to get in. Pure instinct took over. I shifted from reverse to drive, yanked the wheel hard to the left, and floored it. My car lurched forward onto the lawn, bumping over rough ground as I swerved around his vehicle. I heard him shout something, but I couldn't make out the words over the sound of my engine revving and my tires tearing up the grass. I caught a glimpse of him in my mirror, running back to his car, but I didn't slow down. I hit the main road and just drove, taking random turns whenever I saw them, constantly checking my mirror to see if he was following me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep control of the car. After about 15 minutes of panicked driving, I pulled into a different gas station, one that was part of a major chain and had lots of people around. I sat in my car for a few minutes, just trying to breathe normally again. When I felt safe enough, I went inside, bought a phone charger, and plugged in my phone. Those minutes waiting for my phone to power up felt like hours. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning every car that pulled into the lot. Once my phone had enough charge, I called Jessica, who gave me the actual directions to her apartment. It turned out I'd been driving in completely the opposite direction. When I finally arrived at Jessica's place nearly 2 hours late, I was still shaking. I told her and our other friends what happened, and they immediately insisted I call the police. An officer came to take my statement, but honestly, they didn't seem too concerned. They said without any actual assault or explicit threat, there wasn't much they could do except file a report. They suggested the man might have been playing a prank, or that maybe I misunderstood his directions. But I know what happened. That man deliberately sent me to what I believe was his house, or at least a place he had access to. He followed me there without my noticing, and I have no doubt what would have happened if I hadn't managed to drive away when I did. It's been months, and I still check my back seat before getting in my car. I never let my phone battery get below 50%. I don't stop at unfamiliar gas stations, and I've never gone back to that area again. I keep wondering how many women he's tried this with before, how many after me, and how many didn't manage to drive away in time. Story 17. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened last summer. I was 16 then, working my first real job at this family restaurant in town. Nothing fancy, just bussing tables, helping with prep work, that kind of thing. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to save up for college and have a little spending money. That particular night was a Friday in July. The restaurant had been slammed all evening. Some local baseball tournament had brought in a ton of families, and we didn't finish cleaning up until nearly midnight. I was exhausted, my feet were killing me, and all I wanted was to get home and crash. My parents had let me use their old Honda Civic for work that summer. It was a real beater, probably 15 years old, with over 200,000 miles on it. The AC barely worked, and it made this weird rattling noise whenever I drove over 40 miles per hour, but it was transportation. I remember checking my phone as I left work. Only 8% battery left. I'd forgotten my charger at home that morning, and my portable battery was dead too. Typical me. I figured I'd just drive straight home. It was only about 20 minutes away through our quiet little suburb of Meadowbrook. But instead of taking the main road through town, I decided to take the back way, this rural road that cuts through about 3 miles of woods before reaching my neighborhood. During the day, it's a pretty drive. At night, totally different story. The road is barely lit, with these massive oak trees creating a tunnel effect. I usually avoided it after dark, but I was so tired that I just wanted to get home as quickly as possible. About halfway through the wooded section, the car started making this horrible grinding noise. Then the engine just died. I coasted to the side of the road, my heart sinking. This had happened once before. Something with the alternator, my dad said, but never in the middle of nowhere at midnight. I turned the key several times, but nothing happened. Not even a click. Just dead silence except for the sounds of insects and distant owls in the woods. I grabbed my phone to call my parents, but as I unlocked it, the battery percentage dropped to 5%. I barely had time to open my contacts before the screen went black. Dead. I sat there for a minute, trying not to panic. The road was completely deserted. I hadn't seen another car since turning onto it. There were no houses nearby, just dense woods on both sides. The nearest gas station was at least 2 miles back. I decided to wait in the car for a bit, hoping someone might drive by. My parents knew my shift ended at 11, so they'd probably start worrying soon. Maybe they'd drive out looking for me. The minutes ticked by painfully slowly. I kept checking the time on the car's dashboard clock. 12:08, 12:14, 12:19. Each minute felt like an hour. The woods around me seemed to grow darker and more menacing. I locked all the doors and tried the radio, but with the car dead, nothing worked. Around 12:25, I remember checking the clock specifically. I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. When I looked toward the passenger side window, my blood ran cold. There was a man standing about 15 feet away, partially hidden behind a tree. At first I thought maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out his silhouette clearly. He was tall and bearded, wearing what looked like a dark jacket or hoodie, and he was just watching me. I froze, unsure what to do. We made eye contact for maybe 3 seconds before he stepped back behind the tree, disappearing into the darkness of the woods. I immediately tried my phone again, frantically pressing the power button, but it was completely dead. The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. I slid down in my seat, trying to make myself less visible while keeping my eyes on the spot where I'd seen him. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kept wondering if I should try to run, but where would I go? It was pitch black. I didn't know these woods, and what if he was faster than me? Then I saw him again. This time he wasn't hiding. He emerged from between 2 trees about 30 feet from my car and just stood there in the open, staring. I could see him more clearly now. He had a thick beard, was probably in his 40s, and wore a dark jacket with some kind of cap. What terrified me most was how deliberately he was moving, like he had all the time in the world. After standing there for what felt like forever, he started walking toward my car, not rushing, just a slow, purposeful walk. I frantically checked all my doors again to make sure they were locked. I slid all the way down in my seat, my eyes barely peeking over the dashboard. He approached the driver's side first. I could hear his footsteps on the gravel shoulder of the road. Then his face appeared at my window, just inches away from mine, separated only by the glass. He didn't say anything, didn't gesture, just stared at me with this blank expression that made my skin crawl. He tried the door handle. It didn't open, thanks to the locks. Then he moved to the back door, tried that handle too. I watched him through the rearview mirror, tears streaming down my face. I was too terrified to scream. Who would hear me out here anyway? He circled around to the passenger side and tried both doors there. Then he came back to my window and just stood there watching me. I was shaking uncontrollably by this point, curled up as far away from the window as I could get without climbing into the passenger seat. After what felt like an eternity, he raised his hand and knocked on the window. Not aggressively. 3 calm, deliberate knocks. When I didn't respond, he knocked again, harder this time. Then he leaned down, so his face was level with mine, and mouthed something I couldn't understand. I shook my head frantically, hoping he'd just go away. Instead, he started banging on the window with his fist. The whole car shook with each impact. I was sobbing openly now, convinced the window would break at any moment. He moved to the passenger window and started banging on that one too, back and forth between windows, pounding harder each time. I covered my ears and screamed, but I knew nobody could hear me. The horrible thought kept running through my mind. These windows weren't going to hold forever. Just as he moved back to the driver's side and raised his fist again, I saw headlights appear in the distance behind us. The man froze, his head snapping toward the approaching vehicle. For a second, we both just watched the headlights growing brighter. The approaching car started honking frantically, and I immediately recognized the sound. It was my parents' SUV. I've never felt such overwhelming relief in my life. The bearded man immediately backed away from my car and, without a word, turned and sprinted into the woods on the opposite side of the road. My parents pulled up behind my car, high beams illuminating everything. My dad jumped out before they'd even fully stopped, running toward me and yelling my name. I fumbled with the lock and practically fell out of the car into his arms, sobbing and trying to explain what had happened between gasps. My mom was already on the phone with 911, describing where we were and what I'd told them. My dad walked me to their SUV and locked me inside with my mom while he went to check my car. When the police arrived about 15 minutes later, they searched the woods with flashlights but found no sign of the man. They had me describe him and took a report, but without any surveillance footage or physical evidence, there wasn't much they could do. One officer suggested it might have been a homeless person looking for money or valuables, while another thought it could be someone high on drugs. Whatever the explanation, they assured me they'd increase patrols in the area. My dad's friend came with a tow truck the next morning to get my car. It turned out the timing belt had snapped. My dad said I was lucky the engine didn't seize completely, but all I could think was how unlucky I'd been for it to happen there, at that exact moment. I couldn't sleep for days afterward. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blank stare through my car window. I kept wondering what would have happened if my parents hadn't shown up when they did. Would the windows have held? What did he want from me? My parents later told me they'd gotten worried when I wasn't home by midnight, and when I didn't answer my phone, they decided to drive the route they knew I usually took. They had tried the main road first, then decided to check the back way as a last resort. If they had been even 5 minutes later, the police never found the man. They said without any security cameras in the area, they had little to go on. There were no reports of similar incidents in the weeks that followed, which only made it more confusing and terrifying. Who was he? Why was he in those woods at midnight? What did he want with me? It's been over a year now, and I still avoid driving alone at night. I carry pepper spray, keep my phone fully charged at all times, and I never, ever take that back road anymore, day or night. Sometimes I try to convince myself that maybe he was just trying to help. Maybe he saw I was stranded and was checking if I needed assistance. But then I remember the methodical way he tried each door, the blank stare, the persistent banging, the way he ran when my parents showed up instead of staying to explain himself. I don't know who he was or what he wanted that night, but I do know that when I close my eyes, I can still see his face pressed against my window, watching me with those empty eyes. And I realize how quickly an ordinary night can turn into the most terrifying experience of your life. Story 18. I still struggle with writing this down, even after 12 years. My therapist says putting it all out there might help, but every time I try to sleep, I still feel the cold metal of that gun barrel against the back of my head. Here goes nothing. It was supposed to be a day hike. That's it. Just a simple day hike with my girlfriend Holly in May 2011. We'd been dating for about 8 months and she was really into outdoor stuff. I was more of a video games and pizza kind of guy, but I was trying to get more active to impress her, you know? So when she suggested Sayad Valley for a Saturday hike, I was like, sure, why not? We got up early, packed sandwiches, water, bug spray, the usual stuff. It was about a 2-hour drive from our apartment in Reading. I remember Holly was super excited because the weather forecast was perfect. Sunny, around 70 degrees. We weren't planning anything crazy, just a 6-mile loop trail that she'd found online that was supposed to be moderate difficulty with good views of the Klamath Mountains. We arrived around 1 in the afternoon. The parking area was basically just a wide spot off the road with space for maybe 5 cars. There was only one other vehicle there, an old green Subaru with a bunch of hiking stickers. Holly took that as a good sign, saying the trail wouldn't be crowded. The first couple hours were actually really nice. We saw some cool rock formations, wildflowers, even spotted a deer. Holly kept stopping to take pictures on her phone. I remember feeling proud of myself for keeping up with her pace without complaining. Around 3:30, we reached a fork in the trail that wasn't on our map. I think this is a connecting trail, Holly said, pointing to the narrower path that headed east. It might connect to the northern part of the loop. Could save us some time. I was getting a little tired by then, so the idea of a shortcut sounded good. That decision, I replay it in my head constantly. What if we just stuck to the main trail? About 20 minutes down this smaller trail, the trees opened up into a small clearing, and that's when we saw it. A log cabin. It wasn't like a park ranger station or anything official. It looked old but maintained, with smoke coming from the chimney. There was a blue Ford pickup parked out front with the driver's door hanging open. Should we turn around? I asked Holly, suddenly feeling uneasy. Let's just pass by quickly, she said. The trail seems to continue on the other side. As we tried to skirt around the edge of the clearing, a man stepped out onto the porch. He looked to be in his late 30s, thin but wiry, with a patchy beard and a red flannel shirt. He waved at us. "Afternoon, hikers," he called out. His tone was friendly enough, but something felt off. "Beautiful day for a walk, isn't it?" Holly, always the more social one, responded politely. "It sure is. We're just passing through." "Where are you folks headed?" he asked, stepping off the porch and walking toward us. "Just doing the loop trail," I said, trying to be vague. "Ah, you're a ways off then," he chuckled. "That trail's back about half a mile. You took the old logging path." We chatted for another minute, typical small talk about the weather and hiking. He seemed normal enough at first, but his eyes kept darting around, looking past us into the forest. When we thanked him and tried to continue on our way, his whole demeanor changed. "Hey, why don't you two come in for some coffee?" he said, his voice suddenly different, tighter, more insistent. "Got a fresh pot on the stove." "Thanks, but we should keep going," Holly said. "We want to finish the loop before dark." "I insist," he said, and that's when I noticed his right hand move behind his back. When it reappeared, he was holding a pistol, not pointing it at us yet, just holding it where we could see it. I could really use some company right now. My blood went cold. Holly gasped beside me. Time seemed to stop. "Look, man, we don't want any trouble," I said, my voice cracking. "We'll just go back the way we came and—" "No!" he snapped, now raising the gun and pointing it at my chest. "You're coming inside, now!" We had no choice. He marched us up to the cabin, keeping the gun trained on us. My legs felt wooden, like I was sleepwalking. Holly was trembling beside me, but she stayed quiet. The cabin door creaked as he pushed it open and motioned for us to enter. The inside smelled like cigarettes and something else, something chemical. It was one big room with a small kitchen area, a table with 3 chairs, a worn couch, and a wood stove in the corner. Papers were scattered everywhere, empty food containers, beer cans. A sleeping bag was unrolled on the floor. "Sit down over there," he ordered, pointing to the far corner with his gun. On the floor. We complied, huddling together on the dirty wooden planks. He locked the door, then paced back and forth, occasionally peering out the window, muttering to himself. "Who are you?" Holly finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from us?" He ignored her, continuing to pace. "Hey," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "She asked you a question. Who are you expecting?" I regretted the words immediately. He spun around, closing the distance between us in 2 quick strides, and struck me across the face with the gun. Pain exploded through my cheekbone, and I felt warm blood trickling down. "Shut up!" he screamed. "Just shut the fuck up. They'll be here soon, and I need to think." Holly put her arm around me, her fingers gently touching my wounded face. "You're okay," she whispered. "Stay calm." Minutes stretched into an hour. Our captor kept checking his watch, looking out the windows, muttering about them coming soon. At first we thought maybe he had accomplices, but as time passed, we realized he was talking about the police. Around 5 in the afternoon, we heard it, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. Our captor froze, then rushed to the window. "Finally," he said, and weirdly, he seemed almost relieved. The sound grew louder, then came vehicles, the crunch of tires on gravel, car doors slamming. "Get away from the cabin!" A voice boomed through what must have been a megaphone. "This is the Siskiyou County Sheriff's Department. We have the area surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Our captor laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. "Took you long enough," he shouted back, though I doubt they could hear him. Then he turned to us, a wild look in his eyes. "You two are my ticket out of here." He grabbed Holly by the arm, yanking her to her feet. I tried to hold on to her, but he shoved the gun against her temple. "Don't," I pleaded. "Please don't hurt her." He dragged her to the window, keeping her in front of him like a shield. "I've got hostages," he yelled outside. "Back off or I'll kill them both." Holly's eyes met mine across the room, filled with terror but also a steely determination. She mouthed something that looked like, "It's okay." The negotiation began. A police officer tried talking to him, asking what he wanted, telling him no one needed to get hurt. Our captor demanded a car, safe passage, no helicopter following. All the while, Holly remained his human shield, the gun pressed to her head. I sat helplessly in the corner, blood dried on my face, watching the most important person in my world being used as a bargaining chip. At one point, I heard him say to the police, "You know why I'm here. You know what they did to me." I had no idea what he was talking about, but it was clear this wasn't about us. We were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. When the police continued to advance their position, getting closer to the cabin, our captor lost it. He fired through the window, not at Holly, thankfully, but outside toward the officers. Glass shattered. Holly screamed. I heard shouts from outside, someone calling for a medic. "See what you made me do?" he screamed at the window. "Next one goes in her head." The standoff continued as the sun began to set. No lights in the cabin, just the fading natural light, and then darkness. Our captor grew more agitated, more unpredictable. Then around 7:30, he made his final move. He shoved Holly back toward me, and for a moment I felt relief as she collapsed into my arms. But then he pointed the gun at us. "Kneel," he ordered me, "in the middle of the room, now." I looked at Holly, trying to memorize her face in what I was certain were my final moments. Then I did as I was told. "What are you doing?" Holly cried. "Please don't." "Shut up," he roared. Then more quietly to me, "Put your hands behind your head." I felt the gun press against the back of my skull. My entire body was shaking. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. In that moment, I was certain I was about to die. "Tell them if they don't back off in 30 seconds, your brains are going all over this floor," he hissed in my ear. Holly was sobbing now. I closed my eyes, thinking of my parents, my sister, all the things I'd never get to do. The pressure of the gun barrel increased. Then everything happened at once. A deafening crash as the door burst open. Shouting. Gunfire. 3 shots, maybe 4. The gun barrel disappeared from my head, a heavy thud behind me. I opened my eyes to see men in tactical gear flooding the room. Someone grabbed me, pulling me away. Another officer was helping Holly. Our captor lay on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. "Are you hurt? Are you injured?" someone kept asking me. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what had just happened. I just kept looking for Holly. They escorted us outside, past police cars with flashing lights, past ambulances and curious onlookers who had gathered on the road. They separated us to take our statements. I answered questions mechanically, still in shock. My face was cleaned and bandaged by a paramedic. Hours later, they finally let us go. We drove back to Reading in complete silence, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. That night, we held each other and cried until there were no tears left. We later learned our captor was wanted for a series of armed robberies and had been hiding out in that cabin for weeks. The police had received a tip about his location that day. We had simply walked into a situation that was already about to explode. Holly and I stayed together for 3 more years after that, but the experience changed us both. We broke up amicably in 2014, but we still check in with each other every May 15th, the anniversary. Some bonds can never be broken, even when the relationship ends. I still feel that gun against my head sometimes, still wake up in cold sweats, still find myself looking over my shoulder on hiking trails. I've tried therapy, meditation, even moved to a different state for a while. Nothing makes it completely go away. But I'm alive, Holly's alive, and I try to remind myself of that every day.